Hi, everyone. I think we'll just give it a few more minutes to let people filter in, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think Tulay and Ostap, your students are here, right? Yeah. Okay, I think we're gonna just dive in. If before the first project gets started, if we could just have the jurors quickly do a 3-sentence intro, that would be great. I think I'm just gonna select who is to my right. Theo, do you want to start?
Okay, thank you, Abigail.
Sure.
Theo David, teaching graduate and undergraduate design, former graduate chair, practicing in New York and in Cyprus. Next. I'm done.
Karen, do you want to go?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Bausman, and I am on the faculty of the School of Architecture, as well as a practitioner in New York, leading Karen Bausman and Associates Architects. Thank you.
Just jump in. I don't have the list in front of me, so if everybody could just jump in, that'd be great.
I'll jump in. Hello, everyone. Maria Ayolova. I am an architect and urban designer and the co-founder of Terraform One, a nonprofit research and education group in Brooklyn, New York. And our focus is to envision the environmental design of cities. And we do that through pioneering acts of design and teaching. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Can we then start, Abby, or do you want us to introduce ourselves as well? Or do we introduce as we proceed?
I mean, I think we have a few more jurors, maybe.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing anybody, that's why.
Mateo
Yeah.
and Zarui. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it
Great, hooray.
correctly.
Zira, you want to give a quick introduction?
Oh, sorry, I just hopped on, so I didn't know the script. Hi, everyone. My name is Zirui Wang. I am a graduate, actually, and currently I'm the 2020 to 2021 Peter Rainer Banham Fellow at the University of Buffalo. Great to be here.
Great.
David?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm actually the writing partner for Ostap and Tulay.
Okay, got it. Sorry, I don't have the list, so I'm butchering this. I guess we'll just start. Yeah, I think Tulay and Ostap, if you just want to, give a quick intro, and then the students can dive in.
All right. Great. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Ostap and I teach a section of the degree project seminar and studio called Architecture and the Atmosphere. And we, though he's not here yet. Okay, I see. We're waiting for one more juror, it seems, and we will introduce when he comes.
Yeah, I think you guys can go ahead and get going.
All right. And architecture and atmosphere, and we define the atmosphere from two perspectives. One is as air, which is collective and shared, conceptual and social, and the other as atmosphere, which is technical and scientific and has to do with building systems, to say the least. And atmosphere plays like this, we start by studying an atmospheric condition, which may or may not have a presence in the at the end of the year in the project, but we take the atmospheric condition as an opportunity to get into architecture, to start questioning how air and atmosphere help us articulate architectural elements. And our writing instructor here is David. I'll ask both Ostap and David to add to the description of the work we do.
Yeah, your description was great. Not much to add, except that I guess our ambition is that we end up with some concrete architectural proposal, with disciplinary kind of considerations, like how buildings meet the ground, interior, exteriority, like the envelope, thermodynamic considerations. So it's very much about the building proposal. And yeah, that's about it. David?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I, just want Sasha and Jason to know that it's been a pleasure working with them. And I think, going on this journey has been quite adventurous, I guess, in certain ways. So I'm really excited to see your project and everybody else present today.
And with that, Sasha and Jason, please take the screen.
Sasha.
I'm Jason.
So our project is named Ways Out of No Way.
So our project primarily starts with critiquing the lack of rationality and the relationship between infrastructures and urban development. Although the distance between people are minimized by the development society, and the proximity between people actually doesn't provide the equivalent accessibility, meaning that people today, they tend to be more isolated and they take the public communal spaces for granted and do not value and enjoy opportunities for interactions and communities. So buildings and infrastructures are closely built but disconnected due to the lack of rationality, which cut off the potential accessibility between people.
Yeah, so we look at the ideas of connectivity and the ideas of ground city. So the ideas is to minimize people's direct access to the street level, and the elevator bridging networks will redefine the meanings for circulations, and the interchanging circulation network will become the horizontal pathway to encourage people for social interactions, their own sensory experiences in terms of pain and pleasure, and also the atmospheric experiences.
So we started our project by looking at Chongqing as our first very initial inspirations. So the dramatic natural landscape has made the city built on multiple levels and connects the space through bridges. We we found a lot of moments that in Chongqing, it's really interesting that we kind of like frame them into this diagram, and we find them have the potential of connecting, having very interesting effect of how connecting circulations and infrastructures, as you can see in the pictures on the left-hand side. And there's a lot of moments that where it's really intriguing, but only happens in Chongqing, but not somewhere else. So we're trying to convert those diagrams, looking at them in sections and plans, and making them into simplified line works and geometries, so that we further apply them later in the master plan of our entire project.
We also look at the ideas of pain and pleasure, especially by looking at Maruyama House Reversible Destiny. These projects challenge the conventional ideas of how residentials merges with the urban context and how people interact with spaces. So we use the catalogs to define pleasure, discomfort, and also moments that people will decide their own definition of pain and pleasure. So we plug in these into our projects and housing modules to encourage people to challenge their own thinking and their own sensory to redefine their experiences of the site. And this is our initial diagram, just trying to show how these discomfort moments or comfortable moments can be plugged in. For example, there's always a constant exchange from interior to exterior. So people will have to be forced to experience with the outside environment. So our selected site is the Riverside South in the New York City. So when we look at the sites, we see a lot of similarities and awkwardness that are similar to Chongqing. And we also challenge the ideas of irrational infrastructures and the disconnections between infrastructures to the neighborhood, as well as the public park just along the Hudson River.
So when we are doing the site research, we kind of looking at different features on the site. So the first thing we notice is the luxury buildings that sits right on top of the site, and that kind of blocks all the views for the pedestrians. And also we're looking at another feature that is pretty obvious, is the highway. So this highway is kind of, as you can see, there's a picture on the left-hand side that so this is like a view that when we're doing a site visit, and we took this view from the street, and you can see all the beautiful features, and the skyline is blocked by this kind of infrastructure. And also we look at the site, there's a lot of great gardens and a lot of green spaces around at the Riverside Park, but however, it is very disconnected, and the access is very limited to the pedestrians because of the lack of the rationality of infrastructure. As you can see, the only connection here is like a very narrow street down from the highway all the way to the lower land. And also the residual space here is very unused, and a lot of space is wasted because of the structures of highway.
So by bringing in the ideas of reactivating the site to the neighborhood, we first look at the site program based on the urban fabric. So we try to use our site as a testing ground to mimic what it look like in the New York City and the pattern of the New York City. So we also initially use our catalog to diagram a very primary circulation pathway. The ideas of these circulations is to provide an uncertainty and also a diverse experiences. People may not get any direct directions or direct indications. They have to find their own ways out of all these consciousness and unconsciousness and all these like curve and different elevations. So in this site plan, it is a general pictures that kind of show how we trying to use the urban fabric to correlate with our site. And also we try to cut through the existing high-rise building to make these luxurious building more accessible to the public.
So the way we define the programs in our project is that we define them into 3 different levels. We treat the existing building, which is the luxury residential buildings as the large-scale program, and we tried to carve into all those programs in order to creating certain kind of resistance between the luxury building and our new project. And also the medium scale project would be all the public facilities that are connecting through the site and that kind of provided different purposes. For example, like library and the studio stuff for the people to interact. And also the small scale is all the little block as the residential parts that surrounding all the site.
Yeah, so bringing back to how these modules work together, there's always exchange from the exterior to interiors and exchange to different scales of the modules. And the ideas of the modules is to challenge how people feel and define their own spaces. There's a journey from pain to pleasure and a journey to overcome obstacles. Whenever, for example, whenever people want to seek a pleasurable moment, such as a bright open working space or or the private space and balcony, they have to climb a ladder or experience a really dark space in order to get there. Well, another idea is that they may also be adapting to these new obstacles or new given environments. So they can constantly challenge their own senses and challenge their own interactions and be more comfortable in interacting with others and interacting with the environment. So in this elevation, it's just showing how we try to match the urban fabrics as well as create a continuous groundless network for people to navigate themselves.
So in this perspective section, we're trying to show the general picture of how how our programs are allocated. So as you can see, it shows like different scales of programs are connected by and the ramps and the roofs. And also we're trying to cut through the existing building in order to show this kind of resistance of the traditional infrastructure within our new project and how we connect it all the way back to the street. Those are the zooming sections. For this one, is that we're trying to show different scale, the medium-sized program with the relationship to the small-size program. As you can see, there's a office. This module is for office usage, and people can having work on this like weird shape blocks, obstacles that allows them to choose their own way to study or working. And also we having this program, which is a library that people need to crawl into the project with a very narrow entrance. Then all of a sudden release in the program that is having such a bright and large space, as in contrast to kind of echo our concept of pleasure and discomfort. So over here is that a diagram we trying to express how we connecting the existing building back to our new project above the highway. That you can see there's a continuous roof that trying to show the idea of exterior also working as interior and in the same way. And also we carve into the existing building to make it more as a public usage space, as you can see the gym and the basketball court all around. In this last section, this is a general view of how we going through the whole entire luxury residential, and how our project goes through the buildings and connecting all the way back to the neighborhood. We're redefining all the programs inside of the building when we carve out. For example, like here's a lounge and the gym and a playground on a very street level that attract people to coming through into our project, and as well as the gallery space for the public.
Yeah, so the general ideas is open up the site and to allow everyone to get into these like so-called luxurious buildings and get into a continuous pathway to the riverfront and our smaller living modules. So these elevations and plans are indications of how the multiple levels of these circulations and how each types of scales of the modules interact with each others. And in the plans, we also try to show the connectivities and the imagined pathway for people when they're experiencing through the site. And when, for example, they get there from their library to the existing building. And last but not least, we also focus and identify some key moments for our projects. And these moments will be recognized by occupants during their interactions. These moments will be experiences and will be remembered and redefined the space by the occupants.
Yeah, so in this rendering, what we're trying to elaborate is that the idea of like how we want to redefine the idea of circulation instead of just being a destiny between 2 points, that we want to make it more of a public program that you can do all the stuff on the street, not just like walking through and doing nothing. So in this first drawing, we're trying to, this is showing that how we carve into the moment when people walking through our project into the carving of the residential, existing residential, creating a certain kind of public idea of public space.
And we also challenge the ideas of conventional streets. Why is circulation just a circulation? Why can't it be also a program? Why cannot people stay there for a longer time? So the ideas of this circulation doesn't just for people to walk past, it also encourages them to stay there. And these open space become another space for different programs, another space for people to interact and do their own activities as they desired.
And this is a view that we wanted to show how our project changed the way, changed the view when the driver is actually driving through down the highway, that they're giving them a totally different sense of experience. And as you can see, people is sitting right in the center of the block and looking downside. We think this is really interesting moment that they building up so many visual connections, but also having interactions even when people are driving and like having residents in the project.
Yeah, so the idea is that it may be painful for the drivers to slow down, or maybe painful for the occupants to see the cars driving down, but it's also pleasurable for them to witness the entire like forest-like projects and also to witness each other's.
So this is the moment we trying to create that we kind of have the people have to climb up to this super dense and super high, super large steps that it takes a lot of efforts. And during this time, we having created this view really depressing and like a lot of columns, bringing them really kind of doctrinally. So the overall tone is kind of like trying to giving discomfort feeling. And then when they get to the platform, they kind of get a sense of what they're gonna see in front, which is like a skyline. So when they finally reach to the final destination, which is very front of the site, they're gonna see this like a large plaza, and it's all of a sudden the release of the space kind of creating huge contrast between what they have been through in the circulation in order to gain such a kind of sense of pleasure.
Yeah, so all of these are our attempt to imagine New York City in the futures and try to imagine and other definitions of Riverside and a new architectural language that can create multiple sensory experiences, and especially to revalue the importance of sensory pleasure and sensory discomfort and the value of the sense of community and the definition of grounds. And
right.
And this is our.
So this is our like one of like last renderings showing how the overall view is like having different. We trying to add different type of roofs in order to creating make it more playful and having the usage of the rooftop space for people in their relaxing time.
Yeah. So this is the end of our project. Thank you.
Well, I can jump in first. Thank you for your presentation. It's it's a really fascinating project from where you started, of kind of the critique of infrastructure and urban development and how it separates people to what you've proposed. It's kind of, it's like a plethora of different urban experiences all up in the air, creating this, I mean, a very unique atmospheric experiences, as you called it, and kind of bringing that very different notion of urbanity that you presented from, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correct, but Chongqing City here in New York. And I wanted to go back to the very beginning when you said kind of that criticism of infrastructure, but you are looking at infrastructure, what I'll describe just hard infrastructure. And what is true, that was the notion in the last century. Today, when we think of urban infrastructure, we think of hard, but then also soft infrastructure like the parks, the greens, the wetlands, but also social infrastructure. And so you didn't really talk about it. You said you want to create this new community, but how are all these going to happen all together? I'm going to imagine that since this is in the future, all these cars are going to be electric, and so they'll be quiet and there are going to be no fumes, right? So let's assume that, so we don't have to worry about that experience of hovering above the highway, but it's still important to think about access. I mean, if I'm a parent with a stroller, how do I get from the towers and navigate all the way down to the park and the river, or taking my dog for a walk, or just getting to my office? It seems like I have to travel really far away. So maybe you can kind of take us on a walk and think about also, who is it for, right? Is it just people who work there? Because you talked about this public access, but it still seems very private to me. How do I navigate? How do I know I'm included? And I, as a New York City resident, I am welcome to be there.
I think we did trying to also include some like direct access from the site to our project, but we didn't consider it as a comfortable notions. For example, we tried to avoid people to getting directly from the site, like the ground level, to like the planes of circulation planes. So what we have created is a really dark vertical space for them to kind of, but yeah, we definitely think about more to how to open it up more to the public and become, I guess, more welcoming.
Yeah. Well, if I may, excuse me, Maria, I'm sorry, did you want to say anything else? And I didn't mean to.
No, I'm good.
Okay, great. By the way, a couple more references for you, which would have been interesting for us to hear your critique of them. One, of course, is the High Line, okay, compared to what is being developed, I think, in Queens called the Low Line, which is underground, okay. That'd be interesting, you know. And the other, of course, is, which is constantly being heatedly discussed, is the rebuilding of the Brooklyn Heights BQE section or promenade, and so on and so forth. So that would have been interesting for you to look at if you haven't already. But my question to you, is this really a critique of the assumptions we make as to how we circulate in a city like New York, which means at, let's call it, relative street level, and that you're saying that the street level or the street experience has lost its allure, and somehow we need to elevate life, interesting life, way above it? Okay, that becomes an interesting question. I'd love your opinion on that. And then the other thing related to that, perhaps, is in elevating this, what are the social implications, which I think Maria, alluded to. In other words, who lives on the street, which on the existing street, who you're giving us, at least me, the impression you are kind of critiquing and rejecting, and then who lives and what do they do on intermediate level, and then who are those that are at their topmost level. So there's a real danger there of kind of a social stratification, if you will, from bottom to top. So that's another question that needs to be examined. And then another reading of this, which could be positive, but it also could be problematic, is this really kind of not a replication, but kind of based on the model of the canopy in the Amazon and the great forests, where you have extremely high trees, and then you have this canopy, okay? And where the canopy, because of the way it is designed, in fact, allows life to continue and to exist at the ground level of the forest. That's interesting. Or, so therefore it's a positive thing. It's the life giver. Okay, the canopy is designed, this upper level is designed by nature, you know, for osmosis, sunlight, all the rest of it. Certain animals live there and so on and so forth, okay? Or is it the canopy that which denies life, which denies healthy air, which denies sunlight, okay? Which maybe creates zones that are where it is very difficult for certain life forms to exhibit. So I'd love kind of your initial reaction to those concerns of mine. Let me put it this way, in again, admiring the comprehensiveness of what you presented to us.
Thank you.
Tell me, what do you think?
Yeah, we also question the ideas of who lives there, and who, especially when there's many, especially the wealthier class who live in these high-rise buildings. So our initial ideas is to challenge why these people are blocking the entire access to the site, as well, so that we're trying to use the language of resistancy to kind of putting units in front of these like wealthiness or luxurious buildings to has a move to counter argue and also to reopen the site to the general public, especially when the site was actually before the development, it was actually a community with a diverse group of people, including the Latinos and African Americans, but like all of them are being like moved out. So by creating these smaller units and more flexible units allows like more people based on their own culture and their own living habits to move back in. That's like our initial ideas of creating smaller scales modules. Yeah.
So who would be, so in other words, who do you imagine, or how do you imagine the, allow me to use a strong word to provoke you, the abandonment of the existing street level? Who do you imagine living there or using it? And who do you imagine in hopefully an equitable New York City in the future, okay? Living at these different wonderfully, you know, sun-splashed, white, whatever levels, penthouses, whatever you want to call them, which you have very capably designed. Who do you imagine living in that? What is, and then what are the social, I think the environmental, but also social implications of the section? These are serious issues, which to your credit, you are raising, you know, and I really admire you for doing that. But, you know, this is something for all of us to think about.
Yeah. I think we don't have like a definite answer for now, but
Okay.
what I wish is, because actually in this site there are many homeless people like living under the highway. So one of, I guess, if I can imagine, maybe these homeless people, they don't have like a home to live. They can move to these units because they are the residents now, because they're also already the residents living there under the highway. So why not just let them live there?
Yeah, we have also noticed when we're doing the research, we found out like the luxury buildings also is accepting helping the poverties every year, like to offering them new a free home. But actually, what we found out really unfortunately is that they set up different entrance for those poverties and the rich class. So the only have the access to the really bad and narrow, dirty circulation, while only the rich class can have access to the really the large lobby. So we think this is kind of like really unfair gesture, and we wanted to challenge it through our project. So we're trying to make a lot of entrance and make a lot of diversity for people from all class to welcome and residents in our project. And I don't think like we in this project they matter. There's a difference of how they're gonna access and how they're gonna be dwell. And in this project, we wanted to create a kind of community that is all fair and all have this equality in there.
Well, that's very noble of you, but I'm not totally convinced that it would really actually work that way. And then the other thing that I'm surprised that you didn't show us in your sections, and I'm familiar with the site. Many years ago, I was chair of the New York City Commission, Planning Association for the Waterfront, believe it or not. And we studied this site. And one of the battles we won, this is many years ago, pre whoever is there now, we know who's there. Anyway, to in fact pull back the buildings and create this public open space and so on and so forth. So I'm very familiar with it. But what you're not showing is really, I don't see it, the effects of climate change. In other words, the effect of rising water, okay? Where it is possible, for instance, if you want to really reimagine your section, which I find interesting, one could reimagine and say, hey, the part of the site that is going to be inundated in the future because of rising sea levels, in fact, could be the most desirable, okay? Because you build housing that is just a few, like expensive beach houses somewhere, which is elevated above the water. So it's a possibility to take a negative, okay, and to really turn it into a positive. So it's about looking at your section, not only vertically, you know, the street level, then intermediate uses, and you move up vertically, but also to look at your city section horizontally as a series of horizontal layers from the edge, from the changing edge of the water to the through the transitional zone into the existing buildings, which perhaps can be used or developed or as some kind of a foundation, if you will, for a new kind of city. And then I would argue that you have not gone far enough, but then maybe it's too much. Of course, I'm asking for too much technologically. You show cars, you know, for instance, in your beautiful drawings, you know, that are on a highway, which could be anywhere. Well, you know, I don't believe in science fiction. If we've seen, you know, Star Wars, you know, the cars levitate. And I think that will happen. So why in your proposal why do you assume that we're going to have normal cars, you know, on 6-lane concrete elevated up by columns sort of roadways, highways? So maybe it's very possible what we see in Star Wars is not science fiction at all, okay? And then the other issue, and it's interesting, we learn from each other. And I'm thinking of the really wonderful projects we saw this morning, which dealt with density and you know, atmosphere again, and so on. And one of the issues that was addressed beautifully was the notion of density, if you will, okay? And it's how wonderful if there was I mean, you're on your way, you're beginning to do it, but really a re-examination, not so much of normal modes of going from one level to another. In other words, regular stairs, you know, elevators and stuff like that. That's fine, okay? But really, again, how people come together, okay? Within this really kind of a new kind of a community, which perhaps even suggests a new kind of sort of a social structure or a new kind of sort of social stratification within a city of New York, where, as you mentioned, responds to the different cultures, different, you know, different societies, different needs, and so on and so forth. So please think about all that. I know I've thrown too much at you, forgive me. But that's to your credit, because all this work raises these very important issues. So you hopefully will continue to learn from your own work.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of potential.
Yes.
Yes. I would say, following up, Theo, my firm is actually working on this site right now, rehabilitating the New York Central transfer bridge in the surrounding area, trying to reimagine it for an active use area. And I find this proposal fascinating because it's looking forward and backward simultaneously, in the sense that in the last 20 years, New York has been looking from the interior to the exterior of the island, its periphery, and reimagining and reinvigorating the water's edge, because for far too long it was putrid and just in horrible shape. It had been ignored for so long. In the last 20 years, so much money. And looking, I'm sure, Theo, you were on committees as I was, about, you know, right, how are we going to reinvigorate, reimagine this edge and make it accessible and useful for all? And it was the anti-Moses idea or framework, like, okay, it's not an engineering problem, it's a human problem. How are we going to use it? How do we take the human figure and put it back into the space and reinvigorate it for use? And so this project steps right into that very valuable edge in Riverside Park South. And it's got a geography to it too, which is, I love this drawing on the board right here, because it shows the latent sort of geology of the site right here, right? And it's a quite steep hillside, and it's where the New York Central rail beds were actually embedded because of its flat area. And that's where goods from around the country were put onto barges and taken over to New Jersey and then sent to Europe. So it really was a fulcrum point. And because it's geology, it was quite useful for the maritime and trade aspects of New York, what made New York the center of global trade. So now we're using it for running, for children's soccer fields, and that highway is still casting a tremendous shadow over the site. When you're on it, it's always, you know, that big hulking thing behind you. The minute you get under it and beyond it and you're at the water's edge, it disappears magically. All of a sudden, it's a whole new view of the world. And it's so precise, architecturally precise, it's incredible. And so I'm looking with that sort of knowledge at the precision of these drawings here that you've created out of your imagination, your incredible imagination, and trying to re-envision how I would access it right now. And the one impulse that I'm really struggling with is to take us away from the water's edge, how to elevate us, but for a common good, for a much broader good, meaning that density happens in the geology of the site, in the thickness of that geology, that slope. So now we can add density to it, but at the same time, we're not able to get to the edge of the water. And I find that a very interesting view of how to use land, how to occupy land. At the scale of many strata. And then I'm thinking, well, what if we were able to still touch the water, but this kind of density actually gets put back up on the hill, and the existing structures that we see in the background up here, you know, oops. All this stuff up here, the built world, right? What if that became some kind of, you know, supporting scaffolding for more density, and thereby preserving the geology and the resulting landscape and the ability to access the water's edge? And as Theo says, as long as this is speculative and we're jumping into the future, yeah, those cars are long gone, because we're actually able to transport ourselves. I mean, this is really getting into the science fiction of the world 2020, 2025. So all of a sudden, that the exhaust, the noise, all of that is gone. Yet we can still use that landform for active use and social recreation, and for all those times we want to just be humans out in, you know, outside of the restraining geometry of the Manhattan grid. But right behind us is that really dense scaffolding for habitation. Maybe the zoning gets revved up and it can go even higher because we preserve the land below and we can access it and we can get onto the water and take off.
Yeah, and how, if I may very briefly build on what Karen said, I'm drawing, instead of laterally connecting blocks, you connect from and other levels to the water's edge constantly. So this gives, you know, incredible sort of the two lines of movement, or the existing waterfront, which is going to be changing, somehow is connected to this other line of movement, okay, where you can connect with just walkways, could be housing, it could be many things, to this constantly evolving water's edge. That could be really a very, very sort of, in other words, it's about also connectivity within the total urban structure, and accessibility where people can really come together. This way you are kind of isolating one social class or one group of people horizontally, saying, oh, all the good people or whatever, X number of people that can afford millions, they live above 40 feet above or 50 feet above the street, and so on and so forth. And then the rest of us are down here. I'm saying no. I'm saying you somehow need to bring and the possibility of these different people, these different cultures, et cetera, to somehow literally cross paths down to a commonly shared amenity. So it has this wonderful potential. Good for you.
Thank you.
I guess one thing that kind of struck my chord when you talked about present your project is when you were talking about kind of quote like you're like challenging our senses, or I guess also the idea of journey of pain and pleasure, and then you were like talked about this kind of a few of these kind of quote atmospheric experiences, and I'm curious that how maybe I'm curious if you guys have ever thought about like other kind of non-visual kind of understanding of comfort or discomfort. I'm thinking about like the idea of humidity by the water, or the idea of like kind of draft or incoming wind from the water would actually actively facilitate the kinds of quote comfort and discomfort that is beyond kind of like the visual sense. So I'm curious if that's something that you guys have ever thought about a little bit.
Yeah. So I guess at first is also our intention not to just focus on like visually like experiences. So that's why we also try to use different geometries and different type of space and ideas of interior, exterior. And we feel like that was our very first starting points for this project. And I feel like we did have more potential to kind of reimagine it a little, push it a little further. But I guess we're still getting there because there was a struggle for us to kind of represent it in terms of architecture and how like we are not seeing such discomfort and pleasure, but while we can also still being kind of understanding the project just by drawings. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly mention a good project that can inform your work at the current exhibition at MoMA about reimagining Blackness and architecture. And there is a great project by, and I'm not going to pronounce the name correctly probably, but Olalekan Jayforce, and it's called The Frozen Neighborhoods. It's about Crown Heights, reimagining it in the future, where it's post sea level rising. So if you haven't seen the exhibit, please go and see it. It's really great. But look specifically at this project because it has a lot of these elements that you discussed, but then it kind of also brings the soft infrastructure up in the air with vertical farms and kind of and flying cars and there's like these lines that are crossing, and at the same time talks about the social infrastructure and building all these vertical communities that happen in the air. So I'll recommend to go and see it until it's still open.
Yeah, we're looking at it. Thank you.
Yeah, a Pratt graduate, Yolanda Daniels, by the way, is included, one of our graduates in the exhibit.
Yeah.
This project as a thesis or a DP project does talk about our future perfect, right? Because right now New York is having to look very seriously at the entire perimeter of certainly Manhattan as an island, but also the region, because there's this contest now between industrial, manufacturing, housing, and recreational space. And because we're changing our energy, we're going to be carbon free in a very short period of time. So wind power now has become a large issue with the wind farm offshore. What happens when it comes onto shore? That onshore space between the water's edge and the nearby upland is going to be an incredibly vigorous conversation all of us who live in the New York region are going to have. And this project steps right into all those contested spaces and the robust conversations that are going to be taking place very, very, very shortly. So I would imagine the future perfect of this project is it's going to be part of the conversation because it's pointing directly to those contested spaces in a very direct way and proposing a scenario that will be discussed.
That's great.
Yeah. Also, if I can also add to that, right now we're talking about a lot of office buildings in Midtown, at least, maybe elsewhere. Really, they're thinking of converting them to housing and so on and so forth. Okay.
Unbelievable, right?
Yeah. And it's actually happening in some instances. Okay. So looking again at if I was to look at your section, can you go back to one of your sections? Can you show, any one of your building sections? That'd be great. Okay.
You mean this one?
Yeah. Well, the
Perspective.
Well, the building cross section. Anyway.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. Okay, but let's stay there for a second. What I could imagine, based on what's already been said, is really from moving, let me go back to the drawing business here. Okay, sorry. In addition to possibly moving towards the sea sectionally, from an upper level where you get connectivity down towards the water's edge, okay? Maybe this whole becomes a whole new layer that is in fact about, creating a new common, an additional street, not a substitution, but an additional public layer, okay? Within the thinking, within the sort of the three-dimensional aspects of your proposal. So yeah, I mean, there is already in addition to the new, there is an existing infrastructure that in fact could be mined to create, to reinforce, to create, and to use spaces that a lot of people now are thinking, what are we going to do with all this space? All this office space, or even certain kinds of residential, units that, because of the way they were designed, they're anachronistic, they are inefficient, they do not respond, to the people to the lifestyles of the people that would actually live in them. So I just offer that also to encourage you as another way of somehow mining, somehow utilizing, somehow continuing to reimagine, okay, what you have proposed here.
And I just wanted to add a quick note about your presentation, and it's been a great discussion and a lot of good points came up. But when we went through your drawings, they were really, really well crafted and fascinating. But what I was missing is kind of the ability to walk through and follow the narrative story. So you can add a number of diagrams and kind of like explain all these kind of moments and the linkages that you describe, and how kind of the public spaces are connected, and how I can navigate from the subway all the way to the water. So in a project of that scale, you have to take us through several different scales in the drawings in order to tell us these stories of how this is coming together. What is the connectivity? What is the access, both vertically and horizontally? So it really, I think it would be good to do another pass and then diagram it in order to really tell the story of your project.
I agree.
And start to wrap up, and if there are any final remarks, the critics can add them. And I think this was a wonderful, really great discussion about your project, Sasha and Jason. And thank you for actually putting out the work that could stir up this conversation. I also want to say what I admired about your project from the beginning, which is this attempt to bring in Chongqing's urbanism here to New York, like use it as a model to bring it here and to explore the possibilities. And maybe one minor note to the critics is that the kind of the inherent social, inherent distinctions that we see. There's a generational gap, and those distinctions are much less existent for the students, for better or worse. I mean, it's up to you again, Sasha and Jason, to try to understand what these are and why all this criticism is coming about, like about who's here. You know, can it really be those people that you're talking about? You know, why do we think it's impossible? You know, and so on and so forth. It's for you to, like, it's for us to understand why you don't think of that, and for you to understand why we keep talking about that. So that's the, let's say, the conversation communication challenge that we need to like keep working on. There are two things I really admired in how Karen was talking about your project that I just want to repeat. One is the other reason. So I admire this attempt to transpose Chongqing's urbanism to here. The other thing that I admire about this project, and we didn't really discuss, and I'm really happy it came up now, is the temporality or the sustenance and the time frame of this project. So it's not utopian, and I do admire that. Like, in a way, the utopian approach would be slightly simpler. It's not like way in the future. And it's really stuck in this moment between the past and the future, you know? And when Karen said future perfect, that's a really interesting time to be in, actually. So it's like, and that's also where all this criticism is coming from, because we're trying to grapple with this time that we're in. And we want it to be more future-oriented, but it's not, because you're choosing not to be there. Like, you're choosing this very kind of passing, transient moment and try to think about it. So yes, water is going to rise, but you know, there's a time frame for that. Like, in a way, the project's time is now and slightly into the future, not too much, not way into the future. And I admire trying to grapple that time. And I think that's actually where the criticality of the project is. And maybe like in a future iteration, when it goes into your portfolio, when it goes into your book, that can come about in written form, especially in text. And the other thing that I thought Karen said, which I wished we had discussed it, like it came up, but we didn't really push for it, is using the buildings, the skyscraper as a scaffold, or skyscraper itself as almost like a ground for this growth. Like, it is implied in your project, and it could come a lot more forward. Like, imagine like turning the island upside down, growing, and then turning it back, and that's the kind of that's what you could be like. Imagine your ground is the vertical structure of the skyscraper. That's what I heard as a possibility in what Karen was saying, and it came into our conversations at one moment, and we kind of went forward with working with the ground and punching through the buildings and so on. Yes, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for a great project. I also just want to add the kind of response to the site specificity of the project, how it's deeply, this project is a response to the site, the kind of oppressive conditions of the monolithic wall of towers, the highway, the river, the steep topography. You're trying to manage and mitigate all of these kind of very almost extreme conditions that are exceptional in New York. I think in this part of New York, and I think your response does that successfully. You know, gutting the wall of towers, and the guts kind of spilling out and modulating the scale of these things as they kind of cascade down to the river. It gives us a much more playful and approachable project. So I just want to commend you on the ambitions, like the kind of urban ambition of your project, the scale of it, and the amount that you took on. It's really impressive. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's just to add something. Yeah, there's a wonderful, which we didn't talk about enough, I think, looking at the sections and even the plans, you know, but projecting them into 3D as you've beautifully done. There's a certain degree of, let me put it this way, you're creating an overall kind of urban vision, whatever. It's like which can breathe. In other words, it's like a functioning lung, okay, which can breathe. And that's very, very important.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I think we're going to move on to the next project. Mike, do you want to give the intro?
Sure. I'll give a quick intro. Thank you guys all for joining us. And I'll just give a quick intro about the kind of prompt for our section, and then introduce Winnie and Mihan and their project. But I'm Mike Sivas. I teach with Abby Coover-Hume and Ashley Simone is our HMS faculty. And our section, the title of our section is Free Time, and we use this definition from Thorsten Veblen, which is free time is the non-productive use of time, or leisure, let's say, is a non-productive use of time. And that's the definition from the Theory of the Leisure class, which he wrote and was published at the turn of the last century, let's say. And a lot of it was based on the promise of a lot of the kind of the automation that was happening in at least the Western world in terms of, you know, factories and things like that, the automation of production, and the promise that it would, you know, it was kind of pushed through with the promise that it would also allow us to have a shorter work week, et cetera, and things like that, which of course didn't really happen. And we face a lot of those issues, I think, today in a contemporary sense. So a lot of the prompt is meant to instigate a kind of exploration of the ambiguity or similarities or contrast between work and leisure. In the fall, we have the students start off by looking at Super Studio's 12 Cautionary Tales with the idea that a speculative project doesn't necessarily just need to remain fantastical, but it actually can use architecture as a medium to ask transdisciplinary questions, or potentially even socioeconomic questions, just as Super Studio's projects were the kind of critique of modernism and even automation of that time. They also do readings in regards to non-plan, and the site is in Manhattan, you know, the kind of birthplace of the pervasive 80-hour work week, the kind of work hard, party hard. We also did something a bit different this year where we also introduced this idea of the game plan, which, you know, how you might gamify work, or how you might introduce leisure in the gamifying of work, whether it's through game theory, or, you know, get collaboration, or even taking it quite literally, which is looking actually at board games as a kind of orthographic plan, and some of the tricks that they use in order to subvert the orthography of the game board. And so I think with Winnie and Mihan, I mean, what's really interesting is I think they took on this Manhattan as a site in a kind of interesting way, where in some ways it's quite simply a response to the kind of provisional pandemic architecture, the kind of things that we've all seen, the kind of restaurant spaces right outside of, you know, or in the parking spots right outside of buildings. And that potentially being an opportunity to break down this idea of the strong street wall in the city, that not unlike, you know, Koolhaas' description of Delirious New York, that, you know, the city of the captive globe, that New York is really a kind of, the program in the city is kind of hidden away behind this kind of street wall of buildings. And there's so much variety of program in a building if that was somehow exposed. And I think as an idea, it's really simple, but it can yield really interesting results. And I think Winnie and Mihan will show that. But I also just want to talk a bit about what it's been like to work with Winnie and Mihan. I mean, I kind of always think of them as a kind of band, as like a 2-person band. They work super hard, so they're always kind of in the recording studio. They're extremely technical. But what that means is this is probably their 3rd project this semester that you'll see. A lot of the earlier projects were really pragmatic, trying to solve all the details. So this 3rd project, I think the luxury of being in a band like this is what you'll see is kind of their concept album. So it's not necessarily the pragmatic project. A concept album, I think, is like usually really self-indulgent. It's highly personal. And I think this project is for them, but the other part of Winnie and Mihan is they don't really give interviews. They're the types of musicians that, don't give interviews. You have to listen to the music, and then you have to kind of scour the liner notes to figure out where this stuff is coming from, how their brain works, right? And so in this case, the drawings have huge amounts of fidelity. So I think through the semester, at least for me, I was always trying to find, where this is coming from. And what I mean by they don't give interviews is that they're good architecture students. They tell you what each slide is, but they don't necessarily tell you where it comes from. So I guess what I would recommend is that today to treat it as their first interview. They've now granted an interview, and I would actually, I don't know if this is too much pressure on the jury, but get them to, I'm sure you're going to present in the same way or a similar way, which is to kind of just tell you what each slide is. But I would encourage everyone to treat it as an interview and really ask them questions rather than just critique on the work, and really try to understand where this self-indulgent project came from, how their brains work, what they're thinking, how this project unlocked like new ways of drawings, new ways of drawing, new ways of seeing the city for them. Because I'm also excited to hear how their brains work and how this project works in terms of, how it is self-indulgent. So I'll let you guys take it from here, Winnie and Mihan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mihan.
Hi, my name is Winnie. So we're going to present our project Inside Out.
Currently, the outdoor dining program as a new type of retail operation has become a trend in New York City. The outdoor dining installations change the street occupation. Meanwhile, the night market culture popular in southern China gave people a chance to take ownership of the streets and brought a vibrant lifestyle to the locals. So we think both forms of activities suggest a potential that interior programs may be exposed to the street and public space through the adaptability in architectural design. New York City is famous for its verticality and graded street system, in which each block is its own world. The complex, diverse spatial design and social activities are usually hidden behind the building facade, promoting the thinking of exposing the mystery of interior to interact with the outdoor spaces. Therefore, we question if a building's program are deployed into public space, how can this condition be supported by adaptable architecture that seeks to redefine the pedestrian experience and social behavior? Infrastructure into which a building's program and architectural elements can be unpacked is proposed for public space and streetscapes. This infrastructure system allows for manipulating architectural elements and materials such that they respond to social and cultural trends. We think adaptable architecture would be a great way to bring the inside out and vice versa. But one issue we found with adaptable architecture is that it is modular and most spaces are standardized, like current outdoor dining installations. There is a lack of variation.
To get into our site, Manhattan's Chinatown in New York City is an area full of crowds and a place out of the bustling city filled with history and culture. As an experimental site for the project, Mulberry Street and Columbus Park are significant parts of the urban fabric that connects the community and the outside society. As a social hotspot, the place bears the neighborhood's vitality and suggests a different type of space exists among the Chinatown buildings with brownstone bricks from the 1980s. And therefore, we find the value of it being as a potential site for intriguing crowds and communication. Since Chinatown is a vibrant and unexpected site, we don't feel that the standardized nature of the typical adaptable architecture can actually cap the vibrance of Chinatown. So we discussed the post-modern work of Charles Moore, in particular to this project, the Piazza d'Italia, and sought a more fragmentary approach to an adaptable architecture might capture Chinatown's vibrancy better.
The series of buildings on Mulberry Street are selected for the experiment to study the relationship between the buildings and the Columbus Park. And an elevational study outlined our design approach. First of all, the original facade is painted all in white, and the selected building parts with their interior spatial qualities and materialities are cut off and scattered on the public space. Materials in consistent color finish decorate each interior space that is designed to be exposed. Different programs carry different color of materials. The white facade lets the color of exposed interior program pop out and form a vivid outlook. The strategy creates another scenario when the pieces are placed back into different slots, which breaks the integrity of building and form collisions of materials and spatial qualities between the existing building with the facade, with the fragments. The system challenges the typical understanding of building formation and also the boundary between interior and outdoor public spaces. The park is also redesigned for fragmented deployment. The stride pattern indicates the routes of crane trucks which are used for moving the fragments, and meanwhile divide the site into different parts.
The fragments cut out from the building are cataloged by the program, materiality, and spatial quality. Each color corresponds to a type of programs which are unexpected and strange as being part of the building, meshing with the existing programs, such as swimming pool, skate park, slide, trampoline, and sand pool. The project also makes an opportunity of meshing the outdoor components with indoor programs, which alters the function of building fragments by changing context from inside to the outside and vice versa. The two rows below indicate different rotations and placement of the fragments to serve for changeable social conditions and spatial desires. After fragments are taken out, the color and material become the index, highlighting and indicating the corresponding interior space from the outside view. The first condition reveals the program of a swimming pool inside the building, as the picture is showing. And the visual effect produced by the water of a swimming pool becomes part of the spatial experience within a workspace. Imagine people playing and swimming in the water becomes the backdrop of the working. The fragments contains a portion of the swimming pool and the office, which adds a new spatial quality and potential of reusing and rethinking the office while it's outside the building in the park.
And the second piece is cut from a cafe. The slide highlighted in yellow serves as a bar counter in the interior. From the interior, the color allows you to tell, oh, this piece is movable. And you may be curious and start to imagine what it will look like on the outside. While relocated to the public space, this fragment can choose to rotate in 90 degrees and function as a slide for children or skaters and a pavilion for a food market, for instance. The function of building fragments become ordered by changing context from inside to outside, blurring the boundary between building and public spaces.
The third fragment with an embedded curved slope is cut from a double height skate center. Inside the building, the slopes are used for skating, sitting, selling decoration, and also bearing other types of activities. And as part of the fragment deploying to the street, they become part of the topography in the public space. The fragment bears the slope, provides a spine transfer and the banquet ramp for the skaters in the park. It adds diversity of space and activities into the outdoor site.
And the fourth piece that crosses through two buildings is cut from an indoor art studio. The trampolines with different angles and positions add spatial variation as an interior element inside the studio and function as a leisure program for the artists to take a break from their work. Who doesn't want a super jump to get rid of their stress from work? And in the park, the trampoline fragment with balloons provide a new materiality and interaction with other fragments. It must be a hotspot for kids.
The fifth piece is with part of the building ceiling comes out from a photo studio. The stand as part of the interior elements add richness both visually and materially, and it provides space with new functions and spatial interaction mixing with the existing programs inside the building. The stripe pattern extending and connecting inside space responds to the design in the park, which in another way reforms the relationship between the building and the outdoor space. And it is a portable sample pavilion well placed in the open space. The line pattern on the wall and ceiling suggests potential in meshing with the side design to create a new visual effect as part of the pedestrian experience. When it is brought out to the park, you realize that the interior pattern actually responds to its environment and to the site.
The ground materials differentiate the park into different programs, including a skate playground, an amphitheater, a wooden deck, a soccer field, 2 sand pools, and green areas. The various materials and landscape design offer more possibilities in organizing the fragments with the landform and visual effects, contrasting in color and pattern. When all the fragments are taken out, they provide open spaces with flexible choices of programs, which draw crowds and affect the circulation in the park. There is no restriction to where each fragment locates, such that the openness of the park provides a free deployment to serve a variety of outdoor activities according to social demands. So we're seeing that our project blurs the boundary between in and out, and sometimes even switch the interior and exterior. For example, the freedom of deployment can allow the fragment to reform a tight enclosed interior, like so-called interior space in the public park with the manipulation of facade on the fragments. Meanwhile, the open slots on the building facade may be connected with the ground level with some add-on circulation elements so that the interior spread and blur into the exterior. This thing illustrates a potential deployment for a festival such as Chinese New Year. The fragments create spaces for performance, exhibition, library, and food markets. The stripe pattern on the fragments overlapping with the side pattern creates a visual variation and illustration. Some fragments can be placed back into the building, but not necessarily to their original slots. The unsuitable pieces also add new vibrance to the existing interior space.
Leading by the marks on the ground, you walk through a mixture of various scenes. Crossing through a window on a piece of white stone facade in front of you, you are attracted by a plant shop formed by 3 building fragments. The form, color, and material overlap so that the individual fragments echo with each other to create new spatial relationships. Seeing people playing an unfamiliar Chinese board game, smelling the odor of food, or even noticing an unknown potted plant intrigue you to wander through the fragments, to explore the unknown or the interest, and immerse yourself into this strange and fun park. Once a fragment is taken out, it also affects the spatial experience in the interior and alters the usage of indoor elements with new meaning, which obfuscate the boundary between building and public space. The rezoned platform, which initially worked as a support for the fragment, now becomes a stage for viewing or even a table for having a delicious dessert. Sitting around concrete tables, which now also serve as railing, people look through the strange slots, revealing the mystery in various space, say hello to the children who place the trampoline in the park, and enjoy this unusual experience of dining. A fragment sliding into an unfitting slot provides changeable spatial quality and function to the interior space. The material collision enriches the visual effect and the complexity of the indoor space. Approach reforms the building in a fragmentary way and challenges the impression of a typical building through this unusual combination.
So in conclusion, our project challenges the verticality of New York City and breaks the isolation between indoor and outdoor to capture the mystery inside of the buildings. It provides an innovative insight into the use of the buildings and outdoor public space and also their relationships.
The programs brought by the fragments become part of the pedestrian experience, motivating the visitor to see, to feel, be curious, and explore the local culture. And thus, this flexible approach of exposing the local programs and culture events into the public space allow free time to be a productive process of exchange and communication. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can begin. I really like the others. I mean, I really love this project, okay? On many, many levels, okay? In no particular order, the way you've drawn it, okay, really gives us a window into the way both of you really sort of see architecture, see the problem, see the potential. It's wonderful, okay? It's so great that, you know, I'm looking at these drawings and I don't give a damn about what platform were used, or neither do I need to know. What is much more important is that they are very, very personal. The other thing is you've had the audacity, one would say, but I think not, okay? In terms of your first slide, where you show that the first step you take is to paint them all white. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Good for you. The last time I think this was done, if any of my colleagues want to correct me, was the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus, you know, said, out with the Beaux-Arts, out with this, da-da-da. I mean, they did more than paint. They built structures that were mostly white, okay? And devoid of any, you know, decoration or any allusions to any past historical periods. That's great. So in other words, it's very methodical. You're taking certain steps, okay? Including creating a brand new canvas upon which to reflect different cultures, but also reflect, in your opinion, this is my reading of it, real down-to-earth human needs, everyday human needs, be they needs of education, recreation, habitation, and so on and so forth. And then you're doing another thing, which I think is terrific. When I'm looking at these facades, you are opening up some of them and revealing behind the solid street wall, okay, life going on, okay, which exists today. I mean, we do it, you know, we know, I mean, is it the Joffrey Ballet, I think, on the Upper West Side, you walk along the sidewalk, you can look into the dance studios and they're practicing, you know, things like that, okay? I mean, there are many, many instances. Gyms, of course, we can see people working out on the second floor of buildings all over the place and so on. So these are usually activities that are behind walls, okay? You've taken that even further. And I think that's, my opinion, kind of great, okay? And so on and so forth. And I don't know, I just think it has some very, very, it proves in, I don't want to use the word modest because the steps are bold, but in appearance, modest in terms of technology and so on. You've reinforced what I believe in, that is the power of architecture in all its many manifestations, okay, to really create more equitable and humane environments that are a reflection of a today, but of a today that it also has a past, and of a today that also has a future. So that's kind of sort of my initial reading of what you have done. I'll leave it to others to get into other aspects of it, other details. But I think it's a terrific project.
Thank you.
It should happen.
We hope.
No, I'll jump next, and thank you for your presentation and congratulations. I mean, I've never heard a professor introduce their students' project the way Mike talked about your project. So you've impressed him obviously throughout the semester, and now you've impressed us. And I should say that I live in Chinatown in Manhattan, and I've lived here for 15 years now. So this is kind of very close to my heart. And I've experienced a lot of this moment. And I should say, kind of thinking the way Mike set us up to think about this as a speculative, right, project, and kind of not fantastical, but really drilling deep and asking critical questions. And I just really appreciated kind of that the lexicon of fragments that you presented to us. But I would say this already exists. This is not in the future. I mean, if I'm kind of to rename your project, I'll call it Chinatown Urbanism. We want to take what it's here and export it elsewhere. Because if you walk in any given buildings, there are all these fragments that are already in the juxtapositions that you've described. I don't know about the swimming pool, I haven't seen that, but I'm sure it exists somewhere. But all the other elements are here, and it's kind of that. How do we experience them, and who is it for? It's been really interesting during the last year and a half now, because the tourists are not here, right? But Chinatown didn't stop, and it's also kind of this notion of, I would say, probably a disregard for the law, but people do take over the streets and bring their lives outside on the street. And it happens all the time. It happens in front of my house. In fact, it's a big avocado business that I'm fighting with because they're, preventing other people from enjoying the street. But it's kind of that notion, it's already there. So I'm thinking of how this obviously experience can happen both in a physical world, but also kind of in a virtual world, and kind of in a way, how do you learn from Chinatown? And I think kind of an augmented reality kind of proposition would be interesting to kind of think about, how it, maybe a wall comes off as you're walking through to Chinatown with some kind of augmented reality headset, so then you can like peer into the building and then see all these fragments and then imagine the possibilities. So I'm kind of wondering if kind of in this lexicon of ideas, what are kind of the minimum elements that you can bring from inside out, but also how do kind of really have the collection of stories that can be told in a kind of that as I said, augmented reality or VR way, and then just have this kind of ability to then bring the notion of Chinatown to other places in the city. And then since this is supposed to be an interview, I'll challenge you to talk about that. Can you export Chinatown urbanism, and how would you do it?
So I think like it's a really interesting idea to push the project forward and even like expand the idea for that. Like instead for now for our project, like the Axon, for example, like we are more focusing on now like how to play between the boundary between building and the streetscape, and the Chinatown now is like a example for us to like study inside, and we think like the program is it exposed to relating to the Chinatown, like kind of exposing it to the public, help others to kind of like explore what's really happening. And we think that like the infrastructure system we're proposing here could also happening in somewhere else to promote the local culture, just as the project did here as Chinatown. So it's not really about the Chinatown, but like make it as like example to kind of make it happen also in somewhere else.
Yeah, this is great. Hi everyone. Yeah, I just want to follow up. I think a kind of question that Maria opened, and also try to get to also an interview question for you all. I think this is a fascinating project. I love it, and yeah, when Maria started talking about augmented reality, I was sort of interested in that question because it is. It's hard to imagine, I think in a good way in the project, it not being some kind of mixed reality scenario, right? I think they're really, really fascinating, physical and embodied realities here in the project. But it's also hard to imagine that there's not, kind of given all the media and all the kind of, variations and recombinations, it's hard to imagine that there aren't multiple parallel worlds happening here at once, corporeally, ethereally, online, offline, in physical reality and in augmented reality. So so I think that's a that's a really amazing question to open up. Coming from Maria, and but I was thinking also, like, for you all, I guess maybe my kind of interview question, for you, or sort of little bit of a prompt here, is it, could you talk a little bit about how, how maybe this architecture is, is becoming, also a creature of other disciplines. I mean, just as a kind of prompt, it seems like, architecture is a kind of creature of media here. Architecture is also a kind of a creature of landscape, in a certain sense. Architecture is becoming a creature of sort of micro infrastructures, or these sort of new infrastructures, tracks and heavy machinery and cranes and that kind of stuff. So could you talk about that at all? Like, if for you, architecture, at least in your world now, architecture is always already hybridized with something else, right? There's kind of no more autonomy here. Even though there are a lot of really fascinating internal disciplinary logics here, it also looks like architecture is now in a partnership with a number of other phenomena. So, just wondering if you could, give us some sort of interview, liner notes, on that one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we think architecture is definitely a approach or like something that could redefine the lifestyle of the whole city and the people living in that area. So the way why we choose Chinatown is because Chinatown is a unexpected site. There are a lot of things like most of people not from China might not know. So we think our project is kind of a way that architecture opens up an opportunity for the people in New York City to know about the Chinatown, like what is happening behind their facade, and also it creates it opened up a new way of people use the public space as well. So probably before people doesn't know what some people, they only go Chinatown to eat. They only know the Chinese food, but at this stage, people might know what people actually doing in Chinatown. So I think in New York City there will be tons of places like Chinatown, which we don't know what's going on inside of the building. So I think architecture is a good way to interrupt the isolation and letting people know each other and living in another lifestyle. Yeah.
If I may ask a question, following up on Jason, what are your fears, if any, for Chinatown into the future?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yes. What are your fears, if any, for the future of Chinatown? And if so, if there are fears, how is your proposal reacting or responding or dealing with those possible fears?
Well, I guess it's it's a really good question to kind of think, but we're thinking that far right now. As now, we're kind of just enjoying what we are kind of exploring the architectural aspect, how, yeah, and I think, and I think it's a good way to push us to kind of think what's really.
Well, it's something to think about. Also, can you go back to your first two pictures very quickly?
To which one? Sorry.
The first two pictures you showed us, the photographs, street views. Yeah. Very beginning. Beautiful photographs. Yeah, those two. Especially the one on the right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what does that tell you? Why did you choose those two pictures? What does it tell you? How did it inform your thinking?
I guess it's a vibrance of the urbanscape, I think. And to respond to your question, one thing come up to my mind is that actually Chinatown is a very old site, and currently a lot of people are moving away from Chinatown, especially some old residents. The reason is because the building is sort of old, and yeah. So I guess our project probably opened up a opportunity to make Chinatown a new attractive place people want to go, and also to create the vibrance, just like the night market showing in the picture. So yeah, it's a kind of thriving again in Chinatown, I guess.
What I find most incredible about the drawings is they are so precise. I mean, it looks, poppy and highly graphical, but if you go in and look at it closely, I am just blown away by the finesse of the details. Michelangelo was speaking about his Lawrencean library design and said all architecture begins in the corner. So, you know, I always remember that. And when I'm looking at a project and I'm trying to find a way, and I go to the corners and look how somebody handled a corner. And the two of you, I went in and I looked at your corners. They are so precise. You have one masonry unit coming up to another, and they're different scaled, but they're aligned. That you cared that much that you have these two different masonry units in a cutaway heroic cut section tells me how sincere you are about each and every detail. Everything is highly considered. None of it is capricious. It's precise, like a Swiss watch. It's just incredible.
You know,
and it reminds me also, just as an observation, because, you know, we're living in a moment that's history is going to record, right? So I'm trying to remember what happened, right? And what happened for me, and Michael brought up about, you know, you're a band, and one of the great joys of COVID is that I do things that I haven't done before or since I've been 18. One of them is to say every morning, Karen, you're 18. What are you doing today? We want to have that freshness of view. And also I get in a car and I drive destination unknown and I listen to all the new music, like, you know, pop 40 stuff, AM radio. And it's all new to me. And it's so fresh and so exciting. And I find that in your work. I am so excited about the vision of what's coming next in architecture, predicated on what you guys are doing and how you're seeing the world and your optimism, but your precision and your conviction about how you want the world to be. I'm on board, man. I want to live in your world.
I'd like to connect, you know, what Karen was just saying about the precision and the really the earnesty of your proposal. And I'd like to connect those comments to some of Professor Theo's comments about, or question about, fear. And I think the answer in your work is it's fearless, right? There's no, in fact, you know, Chinatown used to be a place where, you know, one would be see laundry being hung out, literally laundry being aired. And that was something, you know, that, you know, they actually had whole programs to get rid of or to, you know, clean up the appearance of the streets. And what you're offering here is something that I think is actually, you're pointing to a certain kind of tension that is between the free time, which we would normally, one would imagine is private or autonomous or something that you don't do in public, but you're actually bringing the idea of free time to transparency. And this is with Theo's first comment about the facades of these buildings. You're actually rendering transparent, rendering what's going on behind there. So there's a certain amount of sobriety that you're suggesting, and really, in some ways, I think in Chinatown, a lot of these things that happen, like mahjong or, you know, illicit things that happen behind walls, is something actually hidden. But what you're proposing is actually, there's a real kind of acceptance in saying, you know, actually, this is what happens. This is our laundry, and this is actually not necessarily something to be hidden. Which I, you know, I think it's a really interesting perspective you bring. And I really enjoyed, you know, just seeing your project develop throughout the semester, but also, you know, I think the idea of bringing park, we talked about this, bringing the park into the building, but also I think Professor Theo's comment about the facade is one that I just, you know, that's a new observation that was brought out today. So I think that really adds to the transparency issue and the whole earnesty part, which I think is really quite correct, quite accurate.
Yeah, I want to go in here for a second. I really appreciate what you guys have done, Rehan and Winnie. You know, I know, you know, it's always been difficult in terms of trying to get the project ideas across and everything else. But I think I literally texted Abby earlier in the presentation, did she just say paint the building white? Because I had never known that was part of the plan. And to Theo's point, you know, that's you know, a very aggressive and bold plan. But I think maybe what that also is telling us that this is really a prototype project. And I think what makes this a great degree project, prototype project, is that it offers us many ways to engage the project depending on our current perspective. And the way that I think that I'm seeing this is really, excuse me, a way for us to understand how we can offer a new kind of formal programming through the way we think about our existing interiors. You know, I think that's something that I think is independent of Chinatown. I think Chinatown is really more of a case study. And to Philip's point earlier, because of the nature of what happens in Chinatown, there seems to be a tendency of understanding like what's concealed, what's illicit, what's behind the scene, and then we sort of break it open and show it in the public, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think there's more to it than that. I think that, you know, during the last 13 months of us being so intimately related to our interiors, this is literally a physical manifestation or aeration of that interior to the outside, to really sort of reclaim the outside again, to like, what is it like to engage others through our interiors? And I think that's, you know, that's kind of like, for me, it's kind of like a brilliant sort of demonstration of taking that idea in that sort of the question, we always have these questions, right? What is that post-pandemic normal is going to be like? What are we going to talk about? And I think Winnie and Meihan has sort of demonstrated for us here a version, at least, of how we might consider providing these new collective spaces, right? These new engagements through potentially some familiarity of the interior, but yet the strangeness of the interior in the public realm. I think that's like, you know, is a really a fantastic way to sort of like encapsulate, right? At least, you know, a lot of our current sentiments of interiors. And I think the idea of, you know, and the title of the project, you know, Inside Out, I think that should be the band name, Mike. I don't know if it should be Fragments. I think the band name should be Inside Out. At least that's my 2 cents.
I just want to say something though, like I mean, I really admire the project as well. The drawings are beautiful. It's really easy to kind of give into and I do agree with Karen, like I want to see this future. Like there's something incredibly fresh here. It's very easy to give in to the vision that you're presenting here, except that that vision doesn't, I mean, it's great to hear you, Jason, explain it, like this kind of a new interior urbanism, like interiorized urbanism. I mean, of course, it's mean for me to say, I wish I'd heard it from you, but not from Jason, I mean. Jason, you destroyed it. No, but so what for is really important. Like if you're this mysterious band, I think, I'm sorry, but like, maybe architecture can, I don't know, Mike, you figure it out. I don't know if architect can be the mysterious band, rock band member. Architect can do that, I don't know. We have slightly different tools and we use the media slightly differently, for better or worse. We're never celebrated that much. We rarely make that much money also. So all those things aside, which makes it the question of what for, like the kind of explanation that Jason gave, really important. And on that, I also want to go back to some of the earlier images that you said, and I want to hear, I personally love the work of Charles Moore, and I think there is a really great connection to be made here, but it's the work, the more domestic and the more radical work of Charles Moore. It's not Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans, which is a highly challenged, contested urban space, public urban space of postmodernism. So the kind of criticism I would like to hear from you is why this is not that. Because you could easily read that as another interior urbanism, right? There are the fragments of what makes a public building, you know, placed in an urban space. Why is this not that? How is this better than that? And the Charles Moore that I'm thinking about, that's actually a bit more relevant, I think, for you, is his own house in Oneida or Onanda, I don't remember, but one of his very early projects, which is like a this house that coils upon itself, like it has this, interior, and then, and so on and so. Yes, maybe. Is it the New Haven? I'm not sure. I have an image of it. I'll look for it. So that's all I'm saying. Like, what for is really important for me, and I would like to hear that from you, whether now or later.
Could you re-clarify the question again? I'm sorry. You're muted.
Sorry, you're muted.
I guess I have a double question. One is like, how do you take that Charles Moore reference that you showed us in the very beginning, and what do you do with that? Let's say, are you critiquing it? Are you, embracing it? Are you doing this? This is the 2.0 version of it. So that's the let's say basic, simple question. And then the other one is like, for instance, Maria said this is Chinatown urbanism, and now we had a conversation about that, which was really intriguing. And then Jason said, no, this is something like more interior urbanism. We've been living in these interior spaces. What if they start, defining the new public spaces that we're going to be facing? Super fascinating idea. So between these two projections, let's say, could you explain your vision version of urbanism? Which one of it is this, and why? So this is a very big question, and like you have very little time, so I don't want to put you on the kind of tight spot here. I really love your drawings, so that's my positive end note. You don't have to answer. Don't be. I don't want to corner you. I don't want to corner you.
We studied the modular system from the adaptable architecture, and we think the project Piazza d'Italia from Charles Moore inspired us to kind of develop the modular system into a more fragmentary approach. Since like the modular system are all the same, but we want to like make it various and to kind of embrace the vibrance and the like the cultureness, like the difference in the Chinatown. So like it's the embrace from the Charles Moore's project. And we think like our project is kind of like achieving in two ways, like the fragmentary, the fragments kind of reform and rebuild the public space, but like in another sense, like we have another scenario where the fragments can be like re-put back and reforms the building itself into like another space, and even like reform the interior into like a very strange combination, like in a fragmentary way. So that's like what our thought and what our projects like aim for.
I wanted to.
Sorry, if I may try and help you, or I don't know if I'm going to help you, but based on what Tulay has been saying, and my fear is, getting back to the word fear, is somehow that the Charles Moore model that we all look at as representative of a certain time in architecture, somehow, erodes the identity. Because that's why I go back to the pictures that you took, especially the one on the right, erodes the identity of Chinatown as it exists. Or is it the future of Chinatown, which is that it's all about, appropriation, clever appropriation, okay, of the visual, okay, as opposed to what I believe your architecture will do, okay, which is really, it's not about appropriation of the visual. It's not about just facade. It's not just about all this kind of stuff. It's really about human activity, okay? And the celebration of human activity to be shared. And the celebration of human activity to be shared that is somehow an expression of the humans that are in fact part of that activity, their culture, their interests, their lifestyles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm kind of referring, I think, to what Jason said. Yeah, it's kind of a breaking out, if you will, okay, all of a sudden, of the imposed by the pandemics of sealed boxes we've had to kind of sort of refer to in terms of our 24-hour existence. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense, which further, in my opinion, makes your project far more, how shall I say, relevant, far more meaningful, let's say, than somebody like Charles Moore, with all due respect. May he rest in peace.
What I wanted to add was where Mike started us by saying this is a band that's never given an interview before. So thinking of this is your first interview. And I went back and while we were talking, studied your drawings in detail. And in a way, there's a lot more that it's coming from the drawings, if that's your music, if we are continuing with it, with this metaphor. And I think you kind of really tapped into something that is kind of unique about Chinatown in Manhattan, and it's that kind of the type of urbanism that it's really brave, this pioneering spirit where and a sense of ownership, right? Where if it's ownership of the streets and the ownership of the sidewalk, the ownership of the parks, they just take over. And in the fragments that you talked and the juxtaposition, and as I said, a lot of it exists already in the buildings. I mean, let's face it, a lot of these uses there, some of them are illegal, some of them are not allowed to exist next to each other, but yet it has been happening for so many decades that it's now grandfathered in. And then there's kind of that notion that it could happen here because we'll kind of push it and try it and then own it and bring others into it and then kind of take over. And as I said, there is this disregard to the zoning and building laws that, and the spirit of let's just do it and test it. And we'll start with and I see it every day, kind of start with a small prototype and then it builds up and other people embrace it. So I think, and that's there in your drawing. So, I mean, I almost wish this could become a kind of a small book or a publication that we can refer to, because there's just so much there. I mean, and kind of having the ability to zoom in through the board and kind of actually study it, I've learned a lot more than you were able to articulate in your so-called interview today. So thank you.
Yeah, very much. It's very much an action plan. In other words, what you've given us is very much an action plan, but as architects, through architecture. Very, very important. Thank you.
Yeah, we want the album cover, the liner notes.
Signs.
My question is, what are you going to do about the ghost of Andy Warhol?
Okay.
He's on the board.
Yeah. I wonder if there's something else more insidious in this, and that the park follies is a somewhat diversionary tactic to a reaction to another element, New York City, or even any kind of high density urban condition that we live in now, that is primarily driven through the cost of space and the density of space that provides developer interest in that cost. In that, by creating some kind of diversion, the space of play, there's an opportunity to begin to capture back some of the lost territories, these backyards or alleyways or gaps or air shafts between buildings that are quite fascinating and are often very private, privately accessed. But in our year of being more internalized in that sense and more isolated within the monotony of the repetitive apartment unit that generally exists, reclaiming some of those that emptied out as these opportunities for the layering of kind of public spatial thresholds that some might be extremely private because they're in the back and some are very public on the front, but that start to make us have a facade that is not only to the street and to the park, but also internal and facing sideways and facing up and allowing for a much more three-dimensional view of what has become a very flat street front for most cities.
Yeah, that's very important, Robert. I think that becomes maybe part of their action plan, if you will. Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you to the fragments or the inside outs or whatever we want to call this band. But Mihan and Winnie, congrats on a fantastic project. And it was a really great discussion today. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to the next project.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for all of the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihan and Winnie. That was quite a bit of fun. I think fun is serious myself, so I weighed in there on the comments. But so I'd like to introduce Future Publics, which is the degree project section, which is co-taught with myself and Evan Tribus, and Alex Deleuze is our HMS instructor. And interestingly, this last project focused very much on issues that we focus on, which is public space and the inversion of public and private space. So that was quite a bit of fun to dive into and see your particular take on that. For us, we're looking at hybrids of landscape and architecture, urban, natural, and political ecologies. And in general, we're looking for radical approaches to public space for the 21st century. And the way we look at it primarily is that public space, as was really well described in this project, is frequently an ambiguous territory of negotiation, interaction, exchange, performance, and frequently collectivity. And beyond the idea of designing for public space, we like to extend the idea of publics itself to ideas like commons, what it might mean to implicate shared resources such as the digital, such as the environment, the earth itself, geology, the air we breathe and the water we drink. And the next project takes us on in quite an interesting way. We had a lot of diversity within our studio, and I would say that the common denominator between the project this morning and the one you're about to see from Ani is a truly invented world of materiality and method. Evan, would you like to add anything?
No, you said it all. I have nothing to add. Let's let Ani do the talking. Go ahead, Ani, take it away.
For the intro, Catherine and Evan. Hello, my name is Ani Bachu, and this project is called Seated Junction, Healing Earth Self. From the doctrine of discovery, attack on indigenous land, exploitation of Black bodies, radicalized police brutality, Black codes, convict leasing, sharecropping, the terror campaign, Jim Crow laws, religion theft of Black-owned land, the federal discrimination of all farmers of color, redlining, urban renewal, mass incarceration, and gentrification. Trauma is engraved in the soil and carried out in our bodies. The very history of the land in the US is heavily connected with the pain experienced by marginalized communities of color, especially Black and Indigenous people. And only recently has the US government even attempted to atone this pain. Bills like the Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color Act aim to provide $4 billion in direct debt forgiveness for socially disadvantaged farmers. And any additional $1 billion will go towards the increasing support and resources for marginalized farmers across the nation. This bill targets Black, Latinx, Asian, and Native American farmers who have been historically and are continually denied support from federal agencies such as the USDA. The first farmers to lose their land during the US farm crisis of the late 1970s were African Americans, and by the turn of the century, the population of Black farmers had declined by 98%. Even after dominating nearly all farmland in America, white farmers and the politicians who support them claim that this is unfair treatment. Land is the center point of many issues that still affect vulnerable and marginalized communities of color globally, now more than ever. And yet land is ground and is a resource of life. Ground contains all information from the past, present, and even the future. Access to land should be treated as a fundamental right and not an object for commodification through struggle, power relations, and social transformations. It is the key to constructing an equitable and just future. The violence and trauma of the past haunt those of the present and future. The memories of different forms of trauma, whether it be environmental destruction, land disposition, and even forced relocation, are all ever present in the forms of living memory, heritage, felt knowledge, social identities, and philosophies. In our current reality, there's a heavy emphasis on geographical aspects of colonialism and the harm left in its wake. In our current reality, the ground we walk on is ready to germinate change and revitalization, but its growth is stifled by gentrification, homelessness, food insecurity, and loss of land and self. To mend this halted growth, we must acknowledge the social and psychocultural effects that attack one's very own home. But how can anyone heal home without an understanding of self? Ultimately, in order to heal the land, we must heal ourselves, especially those of us from marginalized communities of color. The trauma that we do not heal within ourselves exponentially compounds and gets passed on to those after us. Taking time to heal from generational, ancestral, and internal trauma is one of the most powerful things we can do with our physical time here on Earth. Healing or self-preservation is an active and revolutionary form of resistance. This research, this groundwork, is for those of us who identify with this community and deserve to thrive. But how do you even begin to imagine what a healed world could look like while trapped in the confines of this one? Well, let's construct a new world, or better yet, a new reality. Today, we recognize Afrofuturism as a historic movement, one in which Black people creatively reveled in the Black imaginary as a way to deal with hardship. Afrofuturism intersects science fiction, magic, fantasy, and other speculative spaces, giving Black and Brown people of the diaspora the agency to create their own narrative while jumping back and forth and in between the past, present, and future. The depth of world building and self-discovery offered by Afrofuturism asserts a new reality grounded in the earth. The ontological belief that the past, present, and future are inseparable allows us to see ourselves living alongside our past and future selves as we tread this earth. This imaginative framework and psychological liberation enabled me to conjure an alternate future. In the fall semester, I outlined a futurist tale in which the connection between humankind and the earth is restored. Working together with the land, people transmit cultural memories and rituals. I mix our current reality with one where Black people not only survive, but thrive. This playful, junky mindset allows for innovative and critical thought on what lies ahead and helps us envision and summer better futures, ones where we write our stories, ones where we have the power to incite systemic change. Our future publics must support both the marginalized communities of color and the earth in tandem, starting now. Enough is enough. This project is based in West Oakland, rich in culture, creativity, playfulness, and resistance. Historically, Black people of Oakland have fought against many injustices pertaining to human rights, such as food and land access. Roughly 2/3 of Oakland lies on flat land, and the other 1/3 resides in the foothills and hills of East Bay. Currently, Oakland is one of the largest food deserts in the US. The people suffering from food insecurity are those who live in the flatlands. 3 factors that have contributed to this problem include the redlining of property in West Oakland, the influx of tech and business mongrels, which aided a tech-fueled economic boom, and the increasingly large wealth gap. With the economic divide embedded in the geology of the land, advanced gentrification targets specifically stakeholders such as the Asian, Latinx, Black, and Indigenous communities who face the possibility of root shock, the traumatic stress reaction to loss of some or all of one's physical and emotional ecosystem. The effects on root shock can range anywhere from the individual to community level. At the individual level, root shock is the emotional trauma a person experiences when their environment is devastated, such as in events of natural disaster and military conflict. This individual shock increases the risk of stress-related diseases such as depression and heart attack and diminishes social, emotional, and financial resources. Whereas at the community level, root shock is the loss of interpersonal relationships and the social, cultural, political, and emotional capital that is created by collective connections, such as a family having to move out of a home that had been passed down for generations. And yet the specific story is not a new one for many American cities. However, changing this overtold story can start with just one site, one seed. This seed is located near the industrial edge of West Oakland, hugs adjacent infrastructure within reach of local transportation such as the BART train, nestled in between a network of Black and Brown owned farms, and occupies roughly 5 acres of empty land. Many times, marginalized communities of color are encouraged to assimilate, which is synonymous with the forced onslaught of change, further deepening the diasporic rift between the individual self and the historical culture of a community. Often this creates an internal dissociation for individuals, adding, erasing, combining, and remixing the many versions of oneself. One may feel fragmented, incomplete, or as if they're holding on to too much stuff, too much junk. You may even start to feel a bit junky. Marginalized communities of color are never given the time and or space to reflect on this junkification. Our stories and sense of self are never linear and always changing. When we reflect on this experience, we realize that this is also an opportunity. To actively construct this experience is to enact a mix and match methodology, which suggests that healing encompasses all aspects of time, and that these shifts caused by change can create new conditions of healing. Typically, junky is used to describe something that is akin to trash, waste, and considered useless. Rem Koolhaas describes junk space as the residues that humankind leaves on the planet, spaces where people lose all concept of time and orientation, aiding in consumerism culture, and eventually becoming obsolete, leaving our planet with more junk. However, through the lens of Afrofuturism, I'd like to argue that junk space, or junking a space, is a methodology that combats consumerism, capitalist exploitation, and slow violence as we currently know it, and grants equitable land and food access while preserving the environment and species dwelling there, human and non-human alike. Junkie is a method to heal years of systemic oppression, years of land and food insecurity, a method to prevent the destruction of history and memories, and is a method for urban community farmers. To think junkie is to see junk elements as fragments of space and time, which gives room for the creation of new spaces and hybrids. Elements found in the surrounding environment, such as shipping containers, scaffolding, old train parts, and shed, can be hybridized to create new junkie typologies. After selecting all possible combinations of this junk and filtering out to duplicates, a series of junkie typologies emerge which can be hybridized with prosaic farming programs in the forms of market, trade, ground, supply, and service. Together, these form the ultimate junkie future catalog for generations to come. Healing is the backbone of this project, so the creation of junkie hybrids removed from healing is pointless. To heal the land and self, we must interrogate how healing is different for both subjects and where a commonality lies. Healing for land includes strategies such as honoring, seeding, and feeding the soil, whereas healing for self involves harmonizing, balancing, and restoring one's body, mind, heart, and soul. I have categorized overlap in these different forms of healing as restoration, recovery, and rejoice in the form of rituals. Healing is not linear, nor is it always progressive. However, healing is a continuous process, even in moments of rest and reflection. While weaving itself on site, hugging around moments of healing, the spine is allowed to break and shift. And aims to progress forward, the spine then recollects itself, parting with past segments, capping off, allowing itself to pool and linger, creating a healing space that ebbs and flows like a beating heart on site. Once again, adding and mixing the junkie hybrids are then integrated onto site in accordance with the healing suggestions around it. In my junkie future, I'd like to deploy these 10 junkie hybrids, which includes programs such as the native nursery, soil testing sites, outdoor markets, trading posts, sapling reserves, cold storage, composting networks, and seed exchange. The sectional aspect of the project further accentuates the 3 categories of combined healing and how they influence the program adjacent to them. Restoration is the combination of restoring the self and feeding the land. This includes activities such as composting, planting cover crops, eating together, resting, remediating the soil, and connecting back to the ground. In this view, the direct remediation allows for the preservation of native plants and the growth of crops to be shared with the members of the community and purchased by local stores to sustain the well-being of Black and Brown people of Oakland. Recovery is the combination of balancing the self and seeing the land, immersing oneself in nature, mediating, reflecting, touching the world around you, just as you did when you were young, finding, saving, and exchanging seeds, maybe even to harvest them later on. In this view, the community gathers together to trade not only stories and knowledge pertaining to gardening, but also seeds and saplings. The trading route spans over the healing space, connecting the market and trading posts to sapling reserves and compost bins. Rejoice in the form of rituals is a combination of harmonizing the self and honoring the land. Exploring the communal healing brought by rituals such as drumming, dancing, singing, and chanting together, participating in planting, harvesting, and celebratory traditions, as well as gathering, laughing, and thanking the earth, our ancestors, and our descendants after us. In this view, the community comes together to enjoy each other's company and the harvest for the day. The clamoring of tools has its own cadence, with the drumming and laughter of children. The gathering is not too far from the market, which encourages buyers and sellers to pause and join the circle momentarily. The construction of the spine utilizes building typologies and materials as an act of resistance, referencing the construction and building techniques similar to the indigenous Olam people of Oakland and African architecture. The construction of the spine starts with laying down the groundwork. Bamboo and wooden structures are grounded and connected by historical weaving and braiding techniques such as twining. While serving its purpose to connect the past and future through storytelling and resistance, the weaving and braiding pattern acts as a structural membrane to support the onboarding of dirt. Dirt is stored and moved around on site in double-layer meshing casings, which allow for plants to blossom through. Once the bags of dirt and with seeds and irrigation tubes sandwiched in between are secured onto the braided structure membrane, additional dirt and composting are added on top to encourage future growth. Similar to the historical, traditional textile cloths, whose colors have their own idiosyncratic meanings and representations of events and histories, the underside of the healing spine creates moments of wonder and playfulness through storytelling and nuanced signage. In addition to the structural rigidity of the twining technique, weaving is culturally important to many African and indigenous cultures. The act of weaving, especially as a community, has often been seen as a notion of rebirth, a notion of healing. The colors of the woven structure act as signage for the junkie hybrids. I have chosen Nsibidi, an indigenous Nigerian ideographic script which uses symbols to embody abstract, tangible concepts such as love, peace, and unity, and even the actions and objects such as gathering, meeting, and farming tools as a way to allow community members who come from different backgrounds and cultures to communicate with one another. Nsibidi comprises of nearly 1,000 symbols and has typically been drawn in the air as gestures, on the ground, on oneself, or even on houses and clothes. When the community comes together to weave, they are able to create their own form of Nsibidi. These patterns embedded in the braid carry the language of the past and history for the future, one that is so unique to the community and context of Oakland. The planting, harvesting, and exchange of culturally sensitive and high nutrient yielding crops such as mustard greens, yams, artichokes, bok choy, and berries are essential for passing on cultural memories and stories. And the preservation of native plant species such as coffee beans, toyon, silver lupine, and California myrtle wax will aid in unlocking the transformation of the history of the ground. Through the accentuation of healing and farming, this project emphasizes the state of the ground as an essential component for the longevity of the community and the earth. Therefore, the biodiversity of the soil coincides with the prosperity of marginalized communities of color. The soil composition must evolve for the community to evolve. The aim of this project is to not only nourish its community in ways such as feeding its people and the environment they live in, but to also remind them that this is their home. In this reality, marginalized communities of color are losing their private and common property through gentrification and land grabs. This loss in power as political stakeholders in Oakland equates to the loss of one's home and identity. However, tending to the earth can affirm a stronger sense of belonging and identity while forming new connections, reflecting on cultural traditions, old and new, and fostering resiliency. Food and land are meant to be shared and treated with love and care. The opportunity to care for a plant and to be taken care of is a blessing and should not be undermined. We must fight back against the commodification and repurposing of land to protect this relationship. We don't have to create spaces that attract residential developers or fit the criteria for LEED certification for our survival. Our traditional ways of life have always been sustainable. As a child of Nigerian immigrants who have lived through political unrest in their homeland, my depiction of a junkie future is different from your sustainable future. My junkie is different from your junkie. A junkie future reflects and honors the history of the land and its past and future users while resisting the capitalist regime and neoliberal paradigm through collaboration of justice for the earth and marginalized people of color, and those systems working in tandem to support one another. Seated Junction is only a seed in a larger network of things. In my junkie future, I see this project as a guide for food and land sovereignty. It can be replicated on other sites with the same needs for deep healing. Together, we can slowly but surely heal the land beneath us and the wounds within us. There are no individual answers for systemic issues. Thank you.
let me jump in, if I may begin the conversation. On what you've done here, I'm really very happy to see for the following reason. Other than accurately setting out, what has happened up to now and the problems and so on and so forth, you're making a real proposal, which is terrific. Okay. Once again, this is real. Okay. I've had two kind of sort of experiences. Full disclosure, I've done work in Nigeria many years ago, doing prefabricated housing in Abuja, okay, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But more recently, like many of us, I've been to Detroit, excuse me, and there are parts of Detroit that are similar to some of the images you showed, that there's nothing there. I mean, there are the streets, and a few light poles left and so on and so forth. But what really bothers me when I go through these vast areas outside of downtown Detroit, which is having its rejuvenation and so on and so forth, is that all of it has become very green. Okay? So in other words, it's as if nature is hiding the what I imagine, very negative things of the displacement, the destruction of much housing, okay, that happened in Detroit years ago, the fires and all the rest of it. There is no sign of that whatsoever. So on a personal note, I view that as kind of sort of a sacred ground, okay, that has not been consecrated by anybody. So I just offer that in terms of my own sort of experience so far. And out of respect that you've taken this great leap and made a real architectural proposal. Okay? What I would like to have seen more pragmatically, okay, is really kind of sort of a functional kind of sort of process. In other words, the act of living, the process of producing food, the distribution of food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Also, I would wish to see in these images here, I mean, there's kind of almost a dichotomy. Is this a place, and it can be both, but it's not quite clear yet, if you were to develop, and I hope you will develop this project further, whether this is primarily a place for habitation, okay, with all the things that are needed for a healthy lifestyle for people. In other words, obviously their homes, but also their communal spaces, schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? Or is this really kind of sort of a place that gives essential sources and resources through food and the production of, I don't know what else, that provides also not only fulfills a need, but fulfills an income, for the people that would live in this new prototypical community. I also wish, and it becomes kind of an architectural problem perhaps, that somehow your architecture suggested even more living. Maybe it's, maybe I haven't totally understood the drawings. In other words, I would like to see as many people as possible living together, if you will, in a certain degree of positive density in this kind of a community, to benefit for a broader range of people, to benefit from your conceptual skills and obviously your evident design skills. So I leave that for the moment as an appreciation of what you're doing, but also how, in fact, you've opened up possibilities for even this to have an even greater impact on more people.
In response to your latter question, this space is more of a resource for the community in the sense that, yes, it allows the community to come and there's a pickup food service, a hot food service, there's a trading center, which allows people to learn tips and tricks on how to even grow these own foods in their backyards and limited space in Oakland. This site is more of a space for community gathering, sharing knowledge and stories, not so much as living, but the community living that happens outside of the city of Oakland is still embodied in the site, in which how people come together in groups with family and friends onto the site.
Oh, that's good to know. Therefore, I'll let my colleagues speak. Therefore, I think you have to view it as a more sort of holistic project, if you will. In other words, where people actually live, okay, and how they get here, okay, which is very, very important. And how much time do they spend here, and so on and so forth. And how is this activity of production interwoven with the activity of living? So this is something to please think about as you move forward.
Are you from there?
No,
Or
I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I have family who lives in Oakland, but
how did you find the site? I'm super intrigued by it.
I was conducting research on other food deserts in the US. And so through an overlap of research through cities that had either, urban farming history or had gone through mass dispossession, such as like the foreclosure crisis, any city that had like an amalgamation of healing that needed to be done economically, socially, within the system, within the people who live in that area. And so I boiled down the site to West Oakland.
I wanted to say thank you for the beautiful presentation and the essay that you've written. And I truly enjoy it. And I mean, it's hard to offer criticism because I think you've touched upon a lot of really important notions from kind of the really, really hard questions that you're grappling with to coming down to an actual proposal. And I mean, I love the idea of this, the junky future and the catalog of all these typologies that you develop. They're very real. They're ready to be implemented today. And so I just kind of want to offer maybe a suggestion of where do you take it from here if you are serious about doing something with this amazing project. And the work in urban farming has been now for in the last couple of decades been used to kind of help these situations. Obviously in Detroit, there are many examples of nonprofit in California, here in New York. I mean, I've personally been involved and Terraform One was an early advocate, and we helped change the law in order to be able to have urban farms in the city. And it's specifically on housing project lands and a parkland. We work with the commissioners at the time. And so there are many examples where it's kind of this, activism that brings projects to fruition. And it can be done. And also what comes to mind is the work of Teddy Cruz, right? And kind of that activism and sharing. So it's kind of, I think if you think about where do you go from here, I mean, this has to be again shared with the community and beyond the community with the world. So could you kind of like learn from this, junk futurism and how this could then become part of the vernacular, but also at the same time is kind of how do you become part of that community that already exists? So think about, do you see yourself a part of the community? Do you want to have one specific project? And it's something that you can do tomorrow once you graduate, right? If you say, I'm going to start this is going to be my group, my project, and people will gather around you immediately. So it's a very powerful call. And I'm happy to continue that conversation after today, but congratulations, I'm really excited. And I personally, on behalf of my organization, would like to help you take it further.
Work reminds me of the books by Octavia Butler in her Parable series. In this, it's a very dystopic, kind of terrible world scenario that she presents there, but the response to crisis and development of a community that may be rooted in fundamentals and techniques and technologies of the past as an initial regrowth and healing and establishment of shared responsibility and community. But it always has this larger, or not larger, but other goal to the future of somehow in that specific science fiction scenario, building up enough momentum in community to advance humans to expand beyond Earth, but knowing that they have to deal with and heal what is there on Earth at the time. And I think that that is something that could be nice in this narrative. It's like you present that scope, but it then comes out in the project as somewhat very localized in both time and place. And so is there a way to weave in more threads that are connecting to a far future, and as it's now doing, connecting to a far past through this nexus of the present? So I think would be really interesting.
Anya, could I want to raise another issue? I mean, urban farms, I don't know, that's a strange term to me, or urban gardens or whatever. We have a lot of those in New York City, the Lower East Side and so on and so forth, parts of Brooklyn, et cetera, that are really kind of sort of abandoned or appropriated spaces, which become, fun for the inhabitants, nothing wrong with fun, but fun for, the people to go and grow their tomatoes and so on. This is obviously far more serious. It's a whole different level. Therefore, my question to you is, how do you imagine the people that will do the farming, that living in presumably in close proximity to this area, how do you imagine them, how shall I say, what role do you think that this activity and this environment will play in the quality, because I'm assuming there's great quality here, in the quality of their everyday lives?
To touch on, I think the farming you're talking about is the farming that I'm critiquing seriously in this project, whereas many times, not only is there gentrification in cities, but there's green gentrification. There's community gardens that are spaced in neighborhoods that the people they're gentrifiers essentially. They've moved in and they've created these gardens for themselves. This is really an act of reclamation, because for specifically many Black and Indigenous people, the idea of farming and being tied to a land is very traumatic in a sense, because there's many histories that remind them of sharecropping and being used for labor. But this is the same act, this act of tending to a land, the act of growing your own food is the same thing that will allow us to have that healing and to take care of ourselves. There's so many Black people who live in food deserts, far away from any source of proper nutrients, and that's the same thing that's killing people. The reason I view this as a futurist project is because this doesn't feel like a future for us right now, where people are in neighborhoods where they eat fast food every day. And it's not their fault of their own, but their houses and locations are placed and plopped here. And so I feel like it's very essential for marginalized communities to be able to take care of themselves by growing food as a community and sharing it. And I believe that the farmers in this world that I'm describing are people of the community, or just your everyday people who learn to love farming as a way to take care of themselves and their future selves. And also,
could you talk a little bit about ownership here, the different kinds of ownership?
So the farmers who are part of the community are the ones who create the crops, they tend to it. Their family members and friends within the local area are allowed to also come and have their own plots of land, but the markets and places where people are buying the crops from this farm are outsiders. The people of the community shouldn't be buying from the farm because they're also participating in helping the farm. So they gain revenue, the Black and brown farmers gain revenue through outsiders purchasing, because in the sense where we have community gardens where they're white owned and they don't speak the same language of the people who live in that area, those people who will be attracted to this green space can help out these people by purchasing and supporting their livelihood.
Right, thank you.
I'm so sorry. I think it's a fantastic project. Oh, so sorry. I don't mean to be talking over somebody. Do you want to go first? Okay. Thank you. First of all, I agree with everybody who's expressed a sense of being moved by this project. I think that you've touched on, this question of food in many ways as being some form of medium through which issues of health, not just physical, in terms of access to healthy food, but also mental well-being, education, learning about plants and growing. And it's interesting to me actually, because we often design things as architects and then hope that the community engage with it, rather than thinking that food is itself a community builder. So I think it's really interesting that you're starting with this growing process as the means to, in some ways, consolidate and really connect and strengthen a community group within this area. I was looking up, actually, it turns out that Almeida, which is obviously where this site is situated in Oakland, has 7.5% food insecurity, which is about 3% lower than the national average in the US, about 10%. But it's interesting, of course, because it's proportionately children that are affected, which is why I think in some of the renderings, obviously it's a bit, there are shadowy characters, if you like, in the outlined here, but you get the impression that there is a sort of a children's agenda. You see children playing and being very participatory in this, and this is important. I think also you're right to make a claim that this is a rehabilitation project in some ways, like it reconnects people back to a knowledge heritage that's been obscured through all kinds of migration and so on, and then working within, if you like, the industrial complex of late 20th century America. I think as well, you're right to make a claim that this is Afrofuturism. What I would say though is Afrofuturism is more broadly understood as well to be about cultural aesthetics. And this is where I think that maybe if there were any embellishments to add, it's potentially to think about what those cultural aesthetics could be, because you're not just proposing a growing strategy here. There is a cultural intention, or at least a cultural dimension to this, that could obviously be community controlled and contrived, but also there is you as if you like the initiator of this project has, and designer, if you like, has agency over as well. And also within Afrofuturism is the notion of ritualism and magic. And I think that there are potentially stories you could tell about the users that could actually connect somehow to that sense of magic. And other thoughts I had, and again, this is a bit of a download because I suppose it's a reflection of a really remarkable project if people feel so, intellectually, but also emotionally engaged in what they're seeing and their willingness to respond to it. Is really around this idea of, you talked about Black and brown people, but I would also suggest that within this growing strategy is a potential to connect to the indigenous First Peoples through the indigeneity of the planting. So a kind of even broader connectivity to historic peoples from this region. And that really is just about a few additions to the renderings that I think are otherwise beautiful. These perspectives, which are, use a narrative occupation to really drive the performativity of the architecture, which is very sophisticated and engaging. But also you allude to, in some ways, the ways in which this food becomes a means of trade and exchange. And it starts to, I think, raise questions about notions of non-capitalist, since you referenced neoliberalism a few times, non-capitalist currencies. How could this community in some ways generate non-monetary trading systems which have been established amongst many autonomous communities and could become, in a way, a vehicle for some of the cultural aesthetics and even magical mysticism that's associated with Afrofuturism as a theoretical as well as a practical project. So all in all, I just want to say, phenomenal project, really interesting to think about if you like, the political activism of a plant, and also it's the potential it can play in relation to, I think, in many ways, doing everything that you make a claim that this project does, giving people back their autonomy, giving people a sense of ownership and control, and restoring them to the rights to the land that they farmed for centuries but were denied control and ownership of. But also, frankly, addressing what we know to be an ongoing crisis within all of our urban environments, and that's having any form of indigenous ecology that supports diverse forms of life. So unless we have gardens like this, unless we have farms like this, we have no way of sustaining all of the complex food systems and species existences, including our own, without bees and insects and other forms of planting. So there'll be more and more of these. So it's great to see this as a vision of what hopefully will occur, not just, of course, within Oakland, but certainly within New York. And, I also want to say is, do apply to the MLA, you'd be a fantastic student. But thank you very much. I thought it was a really brilliant project.
Thank you.
Hey, Oni, I'm in a certain sense, I'm kind of, struck silent. It's, the project is so serious, and it's, really sort of deep and amazing. So thank you. Yeah, I just think it's great. I just want to sort of see if you'd be willing to talk a bit more about a kind of, philosophy of soil, or a kind of philosophy of earth, because I think, one of the things that the project is reminding me of is, all the great work and, in writing that's emerging, on this, of course, this kind of mutually constituting, relationship, we have with both our sort of local and sort of, kind of globally sort of migrating, sort of drifting material environments. And I think that, there's a tendency to focus on air, even as a kind of, invisible medium. And I think that the air in your project would be very, very powerful, very profound. The air of this environment, that you're creating. But I also, I also get the sense that there's, there's lots more that you might be thinking of in terms of a philosophy of, property. For sure, right? You opened that up. Amazing, in lots of different ways, and in the kind of very constitution of sort of what architecture is and how architecture became, a kind of a discipline, right? The kind of establishment and maintenance of of property in lots of different senses. But but I think that there's something special here going on, not just with air, but with earth and geology and soil here, that is this sort of confluence of of history, and narrative that I would love, if you don't mind, to hear you talk more about and unpack more, and also the kind of environmental health of this as well. So I don't know, would you would you have more to say in terms of this kind of, philosophy of soil and geology and earth in the project? Really, really amazing. Yeah, please.
I'd want to start with, during the fall semester when I was first doing research on this project, I was leaning a lot towards rhizomes and mycelium, and like the study of what's going on underneath the soil beneath us, and this idea that plants and trees and mushrooms have this way of not really verbally communicating with each other, but understanding that, oh, this tree it needs more water, it's a drier season. I, as a mushroom, can take this and transfer it to the tree. This idea and research that is connection that's happening all around us underneath the ground, but we're not attuned to whatsoever, really struck a chord with me. I also watched this one, he calls himself a guerrilla gardener in California, Ron Finley, and he does a lot of study on soil and the same connectivity that nature around us has with one another, we can have with each other. And I think to touch slightly on Harriet's point about the children in Oakland, that children usually eat what they can touch, eat what they can grab. Plants and the way that we manufacture greenery around us is used as props and aestheticism. And so the idea that, oh, broccoli, I can eat that, is very strange to them unless they've been taught and brought up with that, like food that is packaged in a bag, like that is to be eaten, versus something that comes from the soil. I remember I had a friend the other day, I was telling them that I was growing broccoli, and they were a little perplexed that I was like actually growing it, because they're like, there has to be a process that happens in between the growing that you do, like you can't just grow it from the dirt. And I feel like there's a disconnect in our society between what we eat, where it comes from, and how it's grown. And particularly for children, if they can grow something, or this very tangible project of like touching dirt and moving dirt around, if they can do that action, it allows them to realize like, this is edible, like this is what I should be eating versus other things. And so just the idea of like packing the dirt bags as a community together is such an important part of the project as well, because it really, like dirt is used in so many ways. It's used to pack things, it's used as a building material, it's used as foundation. The versatility of it should be celebrated more often, and I hope that this project does that too.
Fantastic, thank you.
I really love your project. It's critical, I think, and I hope you take it on and take it into your future, like after you leave Pratt and you continue doing this. I think the project of reconnecting this community to the land is critical. And I really appreciate the responses you've been giving to the questions you've received, because it shows that you're aware of the issues. And the issues, I think, are deep. I grew up in North Philly, and I ended up after school, doing a competition in North Philly, which is similar to Detroit and a lot of other urban areas where we have a lot of vacant land due to what the city did, and demolishing the houses, etc. And what we proposed was very similar to what you're proposing, which is basically an urban farming strategy, because there's also food desert there. There's no grocery stores. There's very little access to nutrition, et cetera, all the same issues. And as the project was actually selected as a finalist, and part of the process was us going down, I went back to my neighborhood and having like community meetings with people, like the residents there. And one of the things that came out is exactly what you said, that the trauma is so deep and there's so much stigma about being reconnected to the land, of working the land and farming the land, because of the history and the sharecropping. And it's just like, it was a showstopper in a way. It's like, it felt like, as an architect, there's only so much you can do. And then it becomes like a marketing problem, or like a cultural problem. Like, how do you make this palatable? How do you reintroduce this idea, this connection to the land, that it's okay? And I think you're going about it in a smart way, like styling it as like this junky Afrofuturism, or like kind of giving it a style and making it in a way palatable is maybe an approach that could work. And maybe it's also a generational thing. Like maybe your generation, the young generation, can really take this on and make it happen. Because I think I'm so sympathetic with your project, and I think it's an urgent project, and I hope it kind of takes off and happens. So congratulations, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, there's something which refers a little bit to what Jason was saying. There's something very basic for human beings, to somehow be able to put your hand into the earth, from wherever that might be. That's something very, very basic. That I don't know. It's just a very basic, for me, my experience, but I'm sure a very basic human need. And so, to be able to connect physically, okay, from which we came, okay, more or less, okay, is, I think, extraordinarily important. And I think in other words, there are two issues. Amongst the more pragmatic of supplying food and all the rest of it is this dignifying of the human condition of people that have been denied this dignity, by also allowing them to, as they say, both physically and metaphorically, somehow occupy and become intimate once more with one of the givers of life, which is earth, which is the soil, and by the way, also the sea.
I would just like to make a few comments. This is really a really moving project. I think what is most compelling is the clarity in which you present all of these, such a long history of oppression, such a contemporary kind of moment, conflict. And I think when Jason was asking about the philosophy of soil and air, I was thinking about how the idea of just even the rhizomes, how this would grow. Because I think what's also really remarkable is you've kind of come into this with the optimism of a modernist architect, meaning your solution to this massive problem, crisis of our society, you're coming at it with a rather modest solution, which is just that's the kind of clarity I think is really remarkable. Yet you're suggesting, kind of, instead of white houses, white buildings, you're suggesting something brown, and through the aesthetic of what you're referring to. And just as Osap was just talking about the Philly farms, there is a generational divide, I think, even between my family and my parents and my parents' parents' generation. My family everyone was a farmer. In China, everyone was a rice farmer. And then we came here, and what my parents wanted to do was actually get rid of all of that. Brown is dirty, right? So I grew up in a very different way. And I think the philosophy of soil, the philosophy of air would really kind of help expand this. I mean, already you've taken on so much, so it's not like you have more work to do, but it's really just I think thinking in terms of how others can kind of connect to it. And also this is a place of education, right? You're really talking about, I mean, there's so much care and love, as we see in the chat, right? So it's a really compelling project. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ani, I had a quick question to follow up on Philip's comment. I mean, I think in addition to everything that was said, what is really a value here, it's you creating this a new junkie typology, and then that gives us a new design language, right? To recognize what is possible, but also to identify these sites. And I mean, I was wondering, am I going to be able to recognize this when I see it? It's like, yes, of course, this is part of Junkie Future. What do you think? How you kind of make this an actual design language?
Sorry, I think I misinterpreted the question. Are you asking about the current state of this project if it was to be outputted right now?
No, I'm just asking about what you talked about of creating this new junkie typology. And I am wondering, is that something that, it's going to have its own language, is going to be recognizable? I will know this is part of the Junkie Future movement that you're going to start.
I think I stuck to the word junkie just because growing up in the States with parents who weren't from here, a lot of the ways we ornamented our house, our yard was considered junky. Having things, because the idea of a very neat manicured lawn and a nice subdivision and the conformity that kind of displays itself throughout the neighborhood. And in some previous research I did in the fall semester, there was this debate between what should a garden look like? Should it focus on the green aestheticism to make sure that it's a space that makes you feel welcomed? Because to some people, this idea of junk or having things around is distressing and that needs to be tidied up or organized differently or put away. And I'm speaking personally on myself and a couple of friends who are also from very diverse backgrounds, this idea of junk and reutilizing what you have is very homey in a sense. It's a way of survival. It's something that many of us have done since we were children, whereas we've given toys that weren't really toys we wanted. We combined them together, or our parents had to stitch something from the garage with something from outside. And in this Junkie Future, I believe that this typology will have many iterations, that it'll start with very found and familiar objects. And later on, as the architecture develops, the community will be able to incorporate more tech that they need to help renovate the site and keep it running and optimized. Because the thing with junk is that even though it's essentially timeless, it does have like a degradation value. And so I'm hoping that if this was to be deployed, the community could further hybridize this junkie typology, and that the catalog that was shown in the earlier presentation is just a jumping point for people after me.
Thank you. I think this is great. And very important part of your project, that kind of creating that identity.
Anya, I think I would like to commend you. I think that this is a fantastic project and super moving, and how you're connecting the past with the future. And I think that maybe, and that's connected to the question that you thought that Maria was asking you, because I do really think, and in a way you talk about this, about Afrofuturism, but I kind of see it as Afro-present, or in a way like a very close future. I don't see it necessarily as a future that you're envisioning like is completely unthinkable, but I think that even the way that you're drawing the sections showing how this would be built, or even the answers that you're giving to all these specific questions that you seem to already have, make this project very present or very doable at the same time. And I think that that's also a testament to the fantastic job that you're doing, that it's not just proposing something that would be this possibility of healing or healing this trauma, but like something that you have a plan that you know how to do and that could be actionable and could be doable. So if anything, I feel like, especially after hearing you, all the specific questions and all the answers that you have, I'm really curious to see how this could be developed over time, the different agents that you would have to, or that you would engage in your conversations, and maybe mapping that visually the same way that you're taking us to this future, like showing us how you're thinking that we could get there. Because it seems like you've spent a lot of time developing that plan and we're just seeing the end. But I think that in this plan itself, getting community buy-in and understanding how you would, or how one could do that, would be in a way as important as seeing the end. And it's something that you've already done, but maybe documenting or even thinking about how the site would be taken over time, and if this could start as a node and then start to trickle around the entire site as more funds get thrown into this project. Or also the other thing that I was really excited to see in your project is this connection of different fields: architecture, landscape, planning, politics, this idea of healing, which is fantastic to see. So again, also thinking about who would you partner with, and in a way thinking about this as almost like a business plan of, okay, I would like to partner up with somebody that knows about politics, somebody that knows about planning, somebody that knows about soil, and crafting that team that you would craft for you to create this project. Because I do really think that you're taking us there, and it's been a fantastic, I mean, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here listening to this project. And if anything, I just want to say, do more of it, and I can't wait to see this happen and to see the future of this. So thank you, Anya.
Thank you.
It looks like we're coming up on the hour, and I'm wondering if anyone would like to make a comment who hasn't, or someone who has would like to make another.
I actually think students should feel free to speak. There's a lot of beautiful commentary on the chat. Please voice them.
Thank you, Tulay.
In that case, I want to just publicly thank you, Ani, for presenting this incredible project. And I think that it's something that I would have loved to see in my time at Pratt, and it's the first time I have, and to see it done so beautifully, I'm at a loss for words. Thank you so much. Just thank you.
Well, allow me, only because I think I'm the most senior person on the faculty at Pratt, to very briefly, in expressing my admiration for what I've seen from Ani, but also from the other projects. There's something that ties them all together that speaks to our strength as a School of Architecture, at least from my perspective of many years. How shall I say, where they're dealing with the human condition, okay? And the value and the complexities of the human condition, and human injustice, and human needs, and human identity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Beginning with the very first project some of us saw this morning that deals with asylum seekers, with immigrants, and so on and so forth, all the way through to new kinds of living, above the earth, below the earth, and so on. I mean, the wonderful project about Chinatown, et cetera. At the center, to the credit of the students, and of course their faculty, from my perspective, is that it was always about the human condition and the role architecture can play in somehow responding to the human condition. And I think this is a great strength of our school, of architecture as we move forward. So I think that all the projects today have spoken about the future, okay, and how the issues and how the needs of the human condition and of the human being can be met through these very, very bold, in my opinion, and in many ways prototypical thesis projects with great meaning.
Thank you, Thea. That's very thoughtful. So I guess that wraps us up, Jason, for both Ani and for the day. Is that right? If anybody wants to echo maybe Theo's remark, a global set of remarks, I think the floor can be opened. Otherwise we move on, I guess. To another Zoom world.
Otherwise, we go for a virtual drink. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Some other Zoom world. But also, I mean, Ani, we'll talk, of course, but I want to just publicly say that, like, it's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Evan.
I will echo that sentiment, Ani, and really, the confidence that you bring to your work is extraordinary. And it's been a real pleasure to be a part of it evolving. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone who came.
Thank you, Ani.
Yeah, I want to thank all the students, Ani, Winnie, Mehan, and Sasha and Jason for the afternoon session, and also the other students represented in the other group. I was talking to other faculty earlier, and this has been obviously every degree project Saturday has always been a great celebration of the program. But I have to say that this year in particular, as I noted earlier in the day, for what these students had to go through this year to produce these amazing projects is really tremendous. And obviously, and also our degree project faculty who were able to guide them through the many little squares on the screens in these sort of unprecedented times. And I would also thank all the guests who joined us today for a great conversation both in the morning and the afternoon. It's been a wonderful time, and I also want to just remind everyone, for those who are available, please do join us for our 6 o'clock celebration for our class of 2021. I will put the link in the chat shortly, but I want to thank you all for a great day of conversation and projects.
Thank you, Jason, for
corralling
all of us. It's always miraculous, and things always work.
Corralling. Corralling. I like the word corralling.
Next year,
a lot of corralling here.
Next year in person, right, Jason?
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, good deal.
Thank you. Gotta go.
All right, cheers.
That's it? I can end the meeting?
You can end the recording.
The link to the parties in the spreadsheet. So